Chapter 1. The Fourth Name. The Great Hall of Hogwarts had never felt quite so charged with anticipation, though Amelia Bones had attended more than her share of momentous magical gatherings. As head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and a senior member of the Wizengamot, she had witnessed treaty signings, criminal verdicts, and international accords that reshaped the wizarding world. But tonight, Halloween night in 1994, felt different. The very air seemed to hum with possibility and barely contained energy. She sat at the head table beside the other tournament judges, her keen eyes surveying the assembled students below. The visiting delegations from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang added an exotic flavor to the familiar warmth of the Hogwarts Great Hall, their colorful robes and foreign accents, creating an atmosphere of international cooperation that the Ministry desperately needed after the isolationist tendencies of recent years. The goblet of fire flickered hypnotically at the center of the hall, its blue-white flames dancing with an otherworldly intensity that made Amelia's trained instincts prickle. 23 years of magical law enforcement had taught her to notice when something felt off, and despite the pageantry and celebration, something about tonight's proceedings troubled her in ways she couldn't quite articulate. Magnificent turnout, Barty Crouch Sr. murmured beside her, his voice carrying the polished tones of a career diplomat. The tournament's return should bolster international relations considerably. Amelia nodded politely, though privately she wondered if Crouch had fully considered the liability implications of restarting a competition that had been discontinued specifically because of its death toll. Her department had reviewed the tournament's historical records at the Ministry's request, and the casualty reports made for grim reading. Still, the political benefits were undeniable, and the added security measures were supposed to prevent any repetition of past tragedies. Supposed to. The thought nagged at her as Dumbledore rose from his place at the center of the head table, his presence commanding immediate attention from the hundreds of students below. The elderly headmaster had an undeniable charisma that could fill even a space as vast as the Great Hall, but Amelia found herself studying him with the sharp focus she usually reserved for potential witnesses. Something about the way he carried himself tonight struck her as unusual, not his typical grandfatherly serenity, but a tension beneath the surface that spoke of anticipation, or perhaps apprehension. "The moment has come," Dumbledore announced, his voice magically amplified to reach every corner of the hall. "The Goblet of Fire will now select the 3 champions who will represent their schools in the Triwizard Tournament." The flames within the goblet suddenly turned bright red, sparks showered from it, and a long tongue of flame shot into the air. From the tip of the flame, a piece of parchment fluttered down like a falling leaf, and Dumbledore caught it with practiced ease. "Or the champion for Durmstrang," he read in a clear voice, "will be Victor Krum." The expected eruption of applause followed, loudest from the Durmstrang delegation, but respectful from the other schools. Amelia watched Krum rise from his seat with the fluid grace of a practiced Quidditch player, his face betraying no emotion as he shook hands with his headmaster and moved toward the side chamber where the champions were to wait. The goblet flamed red again, and another parchment emerged. "The champion for Beauxbatons," Dumbledore announced, "is Fleur Delacour." More applause, more ceremony. The French girl moved with elegant poise toward the chamber, her silvery hair catching the magical light. All perfectly normal, all exactly as scripted. Amelia felt the knot of unease in her stomach tighten without understanding why. The goblet blazed for the 3rd time, and Dumbledore caught the final piece of parchment. "The Hogwarts champion," he called out, and the hall fell silent in anticipation, "is Cedric Diggory." The eruption of noise from the Hufflepuff table was deafening, and even from the head table, Amelia could see the genuine joy and pride on young Diggory's face as he made his way forward. A fine choice. The boy had an excellent academic record and a reputation for fair play that would serve him well in international competition. She began to relax slightly, thinking the ceremony concluded and her vague concerns unfounded, when the goblet of fire suddenly flamed red again. The silence that fell over the great hall was not the expectant hush of before, but something deeper and more unsettling. Dumbledore's face, visible in profile from where Amelia sat, went very still as another piece of parchment drifted down from the flames. He caught it, read it, and for a long moment simply stared at the writing. "Harry Potter," he called out, his voice strangely flat. The silence stretched like a held breath. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then, like a dam bursting, chaos erupted. "He's not even 17, someone shouted from the Gryffindor table. "How did he get past the age line?" came another voice. "This is impossible." That was Professor McGonagall, her Scottish accent sharp with indignation. But Amelia Bones was no longer listening to the outraged voices filling the great hall. Her legal training had kicked in with crystalline clarity, and she was seeing this situation through the lens of magical law rather than tournament protocol. At a minor, and not just any minor, but Harry Potter, the most famous child in the wizarding world, had somehow been entered into a competition that the Ministry itself had classified as extremely dangerous. She watched with growing alarm as Dumbledore called for Harry Potter to come forward, as the bewildered 14-year-old boy made his way to the front of the hall amid a sea of hostile stares and shouted accusations. The child looked genuinely shocked, his face pale and his movements uncertain. Either he was an exceptionally gifted actor, or he truly had no idea how his name had ended up in the goblet. "Dumbledore," she said, rising from her chair as Harry Potter disappeared into the side chamber with the other champions. "We need to discuss this immediately." "Of course, Madam Bones," the headmaster replied, but there was something in his tone that suggested he was already preparing his defense rather than seeking solutions. "If I might suggest we adjourn to my office?" "No," Amelia cut him off, her voice carrying the authority that had made her one of the youngest department heads in Ministry history. "This discussion will take place now, in the presence of all tournament officials. We have a magical contract involving a minor child, entered without proper consent or oversight. This is not a school disciplinary matter, Headmaster. This is a potential violation of magical child protection laws." The great hall had fallen silent again, hundreds of students and faculty straining to hear this unprecedented confrontation. Crouch Senior and Ludo Bagman looked distinctly uncomfortable, while the foreign headmasters watched with the careful neutrality of diplomats navigating dangerous waters. "Madam Bones," Dumbledore said carefully, "I understand your concerns, but the Goblet of Fire constitutes a binding magical contract. The magic cannot be—" "The magic can wait," Amelia snapped, feeling her professional instincts sharpen to a razor's edge. "What cannot wait is ensuring the welfare of a child who has been placed in mortal danger without proper legal representation or consent. Mr. Crouch, as senior ministry official present, I'm formally notifying you that the Department of Magical Law Enforcement is opening an immediate investigation into potential magical negligence and child endangerment." Barty Crouch Senior blinked owlishly, seeming oddly detached from the gravity of the situation. That is to say, the tournament rules are quite clear." "The tournament rules," Amelia said, with dangerous quiet, "do not supersede the legal protections afforded to minor children under wizarding law, and those protections include the right to proper advocacy before being bound to potentially lethal magical contracts." She turned to address the assembled crowd, her voice carrying easily across the vast space. "As of this moment, I am placing a temporary injunction on all tournament activities, pending a full investigation by the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. No tasks, no training, no preparation will commence until we can determine how a 14-year-old boy ended up bound to a competition that has historically resulted in participant deaths." The outbreak of voices was immediate and cacophonous, protests from students, to heated discussions among faculty, and what sounded like several international diplomatic incidents beginning simultaneously. But Amelia kept her focus on Dumbledore, whose blue eyes had taken on a calculating look, she found deeply troubling. "Madam Bones," he said, his grandfatherly persona intact but somehow ringing false, "I believe you may be overreacting to what is certainly an unusual, but not necessarily dangerous situation." "Headmaster," Amelia interrupted, and her voice carried decades of courtroom experience and hard-won authority. "A child has been magically compelled to participate in a competition that killed its last 5 winners. A child who, I would remind you, has already survived 2 direct encounters with you-know-who, and bears the scars of negligent adult supervision. If you believe my reaction is excessive, then I suggest you explain to me why proper investigation protocols were not followed the moment his name emerged from that goblet." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the foreign dignitaries seemed to understand that something far more significant than tournament protocol was being decided in this moment. Dumbledore's response, when it came, would determine whether this remained a school matter or became something that would reshape how the wizarding world protected its children from the machinations of adults who claimed to know what was best for them. Amelia Bones had spent too many years seeing the consequences of such claims to allow another child to suffer for the greater good. Not on her watch. Not ever again. The investigation would begin tonight. Chapter 2. Magical Negligence. The clock in Dumbledore's office had just struck midnight when Amelia Bones finished reviewing the preliminary witness statements, and already she could feel the familiar weight of a case that was going to consume weeks of her life. The Halloween feast had ended hours ago in confusion and barely contained chaos, but the real work was only beginning. She had commandeered the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom for her investigation headquarters, reasoning that it offered enough space for her expanded team and was far enough from Dumbledore's office to ensure some independence. The irony of conducting a child protection investigation in what was supposed to be the safest room at Hogwarts was not lost on her. "Madam Bones," called Auror Kingsley Shacklebolt from across the room, where he was directing the ward analysis team. "You'll want to see this." Amelia set down the stack of student interviews, uniformly stating that no one had seen Harry Potter approach the Goblet of Fire at any point during the evening, and walked over to where 3 of her best ward specialists were examining a complex magical diagram they had constructed around a scale model of the Great Hall. "What did you find?" she asked, though the grim expressions on her team's faces already suggested the answer would not be reassuring. "The age line was competently cast," said Wardsmith Harrison, a meticulous woman who had been analyzing protective magic for the Ministry for over 2 decades. "Standard age restriction charm, properly anchored and maintained. But that's not the problem." She gestured to the glowing lines of the magical diagram, as where red warning indicators pulsed around several key points. "The problem is everything the age line didn't protect against. Look here." She pointed to a section of the model near where the goblet had been positioned. "The charm prevents underage wizards from crossing the line to approach the goblet directly, but it doesn't prevent someone else from placing a name on their behalf." "Which would be the obvious workaround," Amelia said grimly. "Was this oversight discussed during the security planning?" "That's what we're trying to determine," Kingsley replied, consulting his notes. "But initial interviews with the tournament officials are concerning. It appears the security briefings focused primarily on preventing underage students from entering themselves, not on preventing third-party submissions." Amelia felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came when a case revealed layers of institutional negligence. "Show me the goblet analysis." Wardsmith Harrison led her to a second station, where senior cursebreaker William Weasley was examining detailed magical readings from the Goblet of Fire itself. The young man looked up from his work with troubled eyes. "The goblet was definitely tampered with," he said, without preamble. "Someone cast a very sophisticated confundus charm on it, probably within the last few days. The magical signature is partially degraded, but the technique was advanced. Whoever did this knew exactly how the goblet's selection mechanism worked." Could a student have managed it? Amelia asked. Not a chance, Bill replied firmly. This required mastery-level understanding of both Confundus charms and the specific magical properties of the goblet. We're talking about someone with at least 10 years of advanced charm work, probably more. And they would have needed extended access to the goblet to map its magical structure before attempting the modification. Amelia exchanged glances with Kingsley. Extended access suggests someone who was present during the setup phase, someone involved in the tournament preparations. That's my assessment as well, Bill confirmed. But here's the really troubling part. The Confundus charm wasn't just used to enter Harry Potter's name. It was used to create an entirely fictional fourth school, convincing the goblet that it needed to select 4 champions instead of 3. The level of magical manipulation required for that is, well, it's beyond most of the magical law enforcement techniques I've seen. The implications hit Amelia like a physical blow. She had been operating under the assumption that they were dealing with a prank gone wrong, or perhaps a misguided attempt to give Harry Potter some kind of advantage, but this evidence painted a very different picture. You're telling me that someone with mastery-level magical skills deliberately engineered a situation to force a 14-year-old boy into mortal danger, she said, her voice carefully controlled. This wasn't an accident or a student prank. This was premeditated. That's exactly what I'm telling you, Bill replied. And whoever did it had help from someone with administrative access to the tournament preparations. The magical signature suggests the Confundus charm was cast by someone who was present when the goblet was first activated. Amelia turned to Kingsley. I want detailed background checks on everyone who had access to the goblet during setup. Everyone. Tournament officials, Hogwarts staff, visiting delegates, ministry personnel. And I want it by morning. Already started, Kingsley assured her. But we may have another problem. I interviewed Barty Crouch Sr. an hour ago, and his responses were odd, detached. He seemed to have trouble remembering specific details about the security planning, and some of his answers contradicted the written documentation. Stress response, Amelia said, though even as she said it, she didn't quite believe it. Crouch Sr. was many things, rigid, bureaucratic, might occasionally inflexible, but he was not forgetful or imprecise. What about Bagman? Bagman was more forthcoming, but his answers suggest the security planning was far less thorough than it should have been. He admitted they were rushing to meet international deadlines and may have skipped some standard safety protocols. Amelia closed her eyes briefly, feeling the case expanding beyond anything she had initially imagined. What had started as a potential case of magical negligence was beginning to look like something far more serious. The question was whether they were dealing with criminal endangerment or something even worse. Madam Bones? The voice belonged to Aura Nymphadora Tonks, who had been assigned to interview the students who attended the champion selection. I think you need to hear this. Amelia walked over to where Tonks was reviewing her interview notes, the young Aura's usually bright demeanor replaced by professional concern. What did the students tell you? It's not what they told me, Tonks replied. It's what they all didn't see. I interviewed 37 students from all 4 houses, including several who were sitting close to where Harry Potter was seated during the champion selection. Not one of them saw him leave his seat or approach the goblet. Not one. Which confirms that someone else submitted his name, Amelia said. Right. But here's the strange part. Several students mentioned that Professor Moody seemed particularly interested in Harry Potter during the feast. More than normal, even for a teacher. And a few students noticed that Moody left the Great Hall briefly during the evening, though they couldn't pinpoint exactly when. Amelia frowned. Mad-Eye Moody was legendary in the Aura Corps, a man whose paranoia was matched only by his skill at uncovering dark magic. If he had been watching Harry Potter closely, it could mean he suspected something was going to happen, or it could mean something else entirely. Has anyone interviewed Moody yet? She asked. He was supposed to be interviewed tonight, but when we went to find him, He'd already retired to his quarters and wasn't answering his door. His teaching schedule shows he has classes tomorrow morning, so we planned to catch him then. Amelia made a mental note to prioritize the moody interview. In her experience, when legendary auras started acting out of character, it usually meant something significant was happening. "Madam Bones," Harrison called from across the room. "We've finished analyzing the tournament approval documentation from the Ministry. You're going to want to see this." Amelia walked back to the ward analysis station, where Harrison had spread out a collection of official forms, safety assessments, and approval documents. "What did you find?" "The tournament was approved without a single child protection assessment," Harrison said, her voice tight with professional disapproval. "No evaluation of age restriction security, no analysis of safety protocols for underage participants, no requirement for parental consent or legal guardianship documentation. The entire approval process focused on international relations and ceremonial considerations." Amelia stared at the documents, feeling her anger build with each missing safety protocol. "Who signed off on this?" "Multiple departments," Harrison replied. "International magical cooperation, games and sports, educational standards. But the final approval authority was—" She paused, checking the signature line. "Barty Crouch, Sr." The same Barty Crouch Sr. who had seemed oddly detached during his interview. The same man who was now struggling to remember details about security planning he should have been intimately involved with. Amelia felt the familiar sensation of a case clicking into place, though she couldn't yet see the full picture. Too many coincidences, too many people behaving out of character, too many security failures that suggested either gross incompetence or deliberate sabotage. "I want everything," she told her team. "Every document. I want every interview, every magical reading. And I want Professor Dumbledore brought in for formal questioning first thing in the morning. If someone is using this tournament to put Harry Potter in danger, I want to know who and why." As her team dispersed to continue their work, Amelia stood alone in the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, looking out at the grounds of Hogwarts through the tall windows. Somewhere in this castle, a 14-year-old boy was trying to sleep, while bound to a magical contract that could kill him. And somewhere else, the person responsible for putting him in that position was probably sleeping soundly, confident that their plan was proceeding perfectly. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. Amelia Bones had built her career on protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, and she had never yet failed to hold the powerful accountable for their crimes against the vulnerable. She wasn't about to start now. Chapter 3. The Boy Who Lived Endangered. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom as Amelia Bones prepared for what she suspected would be the most important interview of her investigation. Harry Potter sat across from her at the makeshift conference table, looking younger than his 14 years, despite the famous lightning bolt scar that marked him as the most recognizable face in the wizarding world. Professor McGonagall sat beside Harry in her capacity as his head of house, her usually stern expression softened by what Amelia recognized as protective concern. The elderly witch had insisted on being present for any formal questioning, or citing both school policy and her personal responsibility for Harry's welfare, a responsibility that, based on the preliminary evidence, had been challenged far too often during the boy's time at Hogwarts. "Mr. Potter," Amelia began, her voice gentle but professionally precise, "I want you to understand that you are not under suspicion for any wrongdoing. This interview is part of our investigation into how your name came to be selected by the Goblet of Fire, and more broadly, into whether proper safety protocols were followed in your case." Harry nodded, though she could see the tension in his shoulders. "I didn't put my name in the goblet," he said quietly. "I know people think I did, but I didn't. I don't even want to compete." "Can you tell me about your whereabouts during the champion selection ceremony? Specifically, or did you leave your seat at any point to approach the goblet?" "No," Harry replied without hesitation. "I was sitting with Ron and Hermione the whole time. We were talking about the champions who might be chosen. I never got up, never went near the goblet." Amelia made a note, though this confirmed what 37 student witnesses had already told her team. "And you have no idea how your name might have ended up in the goblet?" Harry shook his head. "Professor Dumbledore said someone must have put it in using a very powerful confundus charm, but I don't know who or why anyone would do that." "Mr. Potter," Amelia said carefully, "I need to ask you about your previous experiences at Hogwarts, specifically incidents where you may have faced unusual danger." She watched as Harry's expression grew guarded, a reaction that immediately raised red flags in her investigative mind. In her experience, children who became evasive when asked about their safety had usually learned not to expect adult protection. "What kind of incidents?" Harry asked. "Let me be more specific," Amelia said, consulting her notes. "In your first year, you encountered a three-headed dog, passed through a series of deadly magical obstacles, and came face to face with Professor Quirrell, who was possessed by you-know-who. Is that accurate?" Harry glanced at Professor McGonagall, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes," he said reluctantly. "But we were trying to stop someone from stealing the Philosopher's Stone." "And in your second year, you entered the Chamber of Secrets, fought a 60-foot basilisk, and again faced a manifestation of you-know-who, correct?" "The basilisk was going to kill Ginny Weasley," Harry said, his voice gaining strength. "I had to help her. And last year, you discovered that Sirius Black was your godfather, learned that Peter Pettigrew had betrayed your parents, and were present when Pettigrew escaped, putting you once again in contact with dangerous fugitives and dark magic." Harry's jaw tightened. "Sirius was innocent. We proved that." "Mr. Potter?" Amelia said, leaning forward slightly. "I'm not questioning your courage or your motives in any of these situations. What I'm questioning is why a child, because that's what you were and are, was placed in situations where such extreme courage was necessary." The silence that followed was profound. Professor McGonagall's lips had pressed into a thin line, and Harry was staring at his hands. "I never thought about it like that," Harry said finally. "I mean, things just happened, and adults weren't there or couldn't help, so I had to do something." "Adults weren't there," Amelia repeated, making another note. "Mr. Potter, during these incidents, was Professor Dumbledore aware of the dangers you were facing?" I think so. Mostly. He always seemed to know things afterward." "But he didn't prevent you from facing these dangers?" Harry looked confused, as if the question had never occurred to him. "He said I had to make my own choices, that it was important for me to learn things for myself." Amelia felt a cold anger beginning to build in her chest. 3 years of life-threatening situations, and the pattern was always the same. Harry Potter, alone or with fellow children, were facing adult-level threats, while the adults who should have been protecting him remained conspicuously absent until after the danger had passed. "Professor McGonagall," she said, turning to the older witch, "were you aware of the extent of danger Mr. Potter faced in these incidents?" McGonagall's Scottish accent was sharp, with barely controlled emotion. "Not fully, no. The details often emerged after the fact, during end-of-term discussions or disciplinary reviews. I must admit, Madam Bones, that seeing it laid out so starkly is deeply troubling. Mr. Potter, I need to ask you about your home situation during the summers. You live with your mother's sister and her family, correct?" Harry's entire demeanor changed. Where he had been reluctant but cooperative before, now he became visibly withdrawn. "Yes, or the Dursleys. And how would you describe your treatment there?" "It's fine," Harry said quickly. Too quickly. "They feed me and give me a place to sleep." Amelia had conducted enough child welfare investigations to recognize deflection when she heard it. "Mr. Potter, I'm going to share with you what our preliminary review of ministry records has revealed. And I want you to know that none of this is your fault." She opened the file she had been dreading to discuss. According to Muggle Social Services reports that were filed with the Ministry's Muggle Liaison Office, there were 3 separate incidents of neighbour complaints about the Dursley household between 1985 and 1991. Complaints about a child being locked in a room, about possible food restrictions, and about what appeared to be emotional abuse. Harry's face had gone pale, but he said nothing. "Additionally," Amelia continued, "Madam Pomfrey has provided me with your medical records from your time at Hogwarts. Each September when you arrive, you are consistently underweight, show signs of malnutrition, and often have old injuries that suggest you receive minimal medical care during the summers." "They don't like magic," Harry said quietly. They want me to be normal." Professor McGonagall made a sound that might have been a strangled gasp. "Mr. Potter, did you ever tell anyone at Hogwarts about your treatment at home?" "Who was I supposed to tell?" Harry asked, and the simple honesty of the question hit Amelia like a physical blow. "Professor Dumbledore said I had to go back there every summer. He said it was for my protection, because of my mother's sacrifice, that the blood protection would keep me safe from you-know-who." Amelia closed the medical file, her professional composure barely intact. The picture that was emerging was of a child who had been systematically isolated from potential advocates, told that his suffering was necessary for his protection, and then repeatedly placed in situations where he was forced to risk his life to save others. "Mr. Potter," she said carefully, "when you were placed with the Dursleys as an infant, do you know if your parents had made any provisions for your care? A will, perhaps, or designated guardians?" Harry looked confused. "I don't think so. Professor Dumbledore said the Dursleys were my only family." "And you've never had any other adults in your life who might have served as advocates or guardians? Friends of your parents, perhaps?" "Well," Harry said hesitantly, "there's Sirius. He's my godfather, and he said my parents wanted him to look after me if anything happened to them. But he was in Azkaban, and now he's on the run." Amelia made a note to prioritize research into the Potter, will, and any existing guardianship arrangements. If Harry Potter had been placed with abusive relatives in violation of his parents' wishes, that was a serious legal matter, entirely separate from the current investigation. "Mr. Potter, I want you to understand something," she said, setting down her quill and looking directly at him. "What has happened to you, the repeated dangerous situations, the lack of proper care during summers, the absence of legal advocacy, none of this is normal. Children, even famous children, have a right to safety and proper guardianship. They have a right to adults who put their welfare first." "But I'm not normal," Harry said, touching his scar unconsciously. "I'm the boy who lived. I have responsibilities." "You are a 14-year-old child," Amelia replied firmly. "Whatever responsibilities the wizarding world has placed on you, they should never override your right to safety and childhood." She stood, indicating that the formal portion of the interview was concluded. "Mr. Potter, I want you to know that this investigation will look into every aspect of how you've been treated, both at school and at home. If laws have been broken, or if proper procedures have been ignored, there will be accountability." As Harry and Professor McGonagall prepared to leave, Amelia added, "And Mr. Potter, until this investigation is concluded and proper safety measures are in place, or you will not be participating in any tournament activities. That's not a request. It's a legal injunction issued by the Department of Magical Law Enforcement." After they left, Amelia sat alone in the classroom, staring at the file of evidence that painted a portrait of systematic child endangerment disguised as character building. Harry Potter had been failed by every adult institution that should have protected him. The ministry that placed him with abusive relatives, the school that allowed him to face mortal dangers, and the legal system that had never ensured he had proper advocacy. But more troubling than the institutional failures was the growing suspicion that these weren't failures at all. The pattern was too consistent, too convenient. It suggested something far worse than negligence. It suggested a deliberate policy of keeping Harry Potter vulnerable and isolated, of ensuring that when dangerous situations arose, he would have no choice but to face them alone. The question was, who benefited from keeping the boy who lived in constant peril, and what were they preparing him for? Chapter 4. Shadows in the Ministry. The Ministry's Department of Magical Law Enforcement never truly slept, but at 3 a.m, on November 2nd, it hummed with an energy that Amelia Bones recognized from her most complex investigations. Her team had returned from Hogwarts with enough evidence to warrant a full-scale inquiry, and what they were discovering in the Ministry's own records was proving far more troubling than she had anticipated. Madame Bones, called Aura Williamson, from across the war room they had established on level 2, you need to see these signature analyses. Amelia set down the stack of security clearance documents she had been reviewing and walked over to where Williamson had spread out the tournament approval papers alongside a collection of other documents bearing Barty Crouch Sr.'s signature from the past 6 months. What did you find? Inconsistencies, Williamson replied, pointing to a detailed chart he had constructed. Look at these signatures from August, when the initial tournament approval was filed. He indicated a section of Crouch Sr.'s signature on the tournament documents. Notice the angle of the T in Barty and the loop formation in the C of Crouch. Amelia studied the signatures, then looked at the comparison documents Williamson had arranged in chronological order. They're different, she said, her voice carefully neutral, even as alarm bells began ringing in her mind. Not just different, progressively different, Williamson confirmed. The signatures from June and July look normal, consistent with Crouch Sr.'s established patterns. But starting in August, right around the time the tournament planning intensified, there are subtle changes. The pressure points are wrong, the rhythm is off, and by October, he indicated the most recent documents. By October, whoever was signing these was clearly struggling to maintain consistency. Forgery? Amelia asked, though she suspected the answer would be more complicated than simple document fraud. Possibly, or someone signing under duress, or while impaired in some way. The handwriting analysis suggests the person holding the quill was trying to match Crouch Sr.'s signature, but had to think about each letter instead of writing naturally. Amelia felt the familiar chill that came when an investigation shifted from administrative oversight to potential criminal conspiracy. Who else has access to Crouch Sr.'s official seal and signature authority? That's where it gets interesting, Williamson replied, pulling out another set of documents. According to ministry records, only 3 people have official authorization to use Crouch Sr.'s seal. Crouch himself, his personal secretary, and his immediate deputy. But the security logs show that someone has been accessing his office outside of normal working hours repeatedly over the past 2 months. Any indication who? The magical signatures on the office wards were scrambled, deliberately, we think. Someone with advanced knowledge of ministry security protocols covered their tracks very carefully. Amelia made a mental note to prioritize a full audit of the International Magical Cooperation Department's security procedures. If someone was manipulating Barty Crouch Sr. through forgery, coercion, or worse, it had implications far beyond the Triwizard Tournament. Madame Bones, Aura Tonks approached with a thick file under her arm. I finished reviewing the visitor logs for Hogwarts over the past 2 months. We have a problem. Define problem, Amelia said, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew. 11 different ministry employees visited Hogwarts between September 1st and October 30th, Tonks reported, opening her file. That's not unusual in itself. We often have business at the school. But the timing and stated purposes of several visits don't make sense. She laid out a timeline on the conference table. Look at this pattern. September 15th, Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes, ostensibly to review safety protocols for the tournament. September 22nd, International Magical Cooperation to coordinate with foreign delegations. October 5th, Games and Sports Department for equipment inspection. Still sounds routine, Amelia said, though she could tell from Tonks's expression that there was more. It would be, except that I cross-referenced these visits with the actual work schedules and assignments for these departments. The person who visited from magical accidents and catastrophes was supposed to be investigating a flu network malfunction in Cardiff that day. The international cooperation representative was logged as attending meetings in London during their supposed Hogwarts visit. And the Games and Sports Inspector? He was on holiday in France. Amelia stared at the timeline, feeling pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to arrange themselves in her mind. You're telling me that multiple people impersonated ministry employees to gain access to Hogwarts during the tournament preparation period? That's exactly what I'm telling you, Tonks confirmed. And here's the really troubling part. Whoever arranged these false visits had access to authentic ministry identification, knew our internal scheduling systems well enough to avoid conflicts, and understood Hogwarts's visitor protocols perfectly. Inside knowledge, Amelia muttered. Someone with intimate familiarity with both ministry operations and Hogwarts procedures. Gets worse, Tonks continued. I contacted Hogwarts to verify what these visitors actually did while they were there. According to the staff I spoke with, several of these fake inspectors spent significant time in areas that had nothing to do with their stated purposes. The safety protocol reviewer was seen examining the Great Hall's ward anchoring points, or the equipment inspector asked detailed questions about the castle's defensive systems. Amelia felt her anger building with each new revelation. This wasn't magical negligence, or even criminal endangerment. This was a sophisticated infiltration operation targeting Hogwarts, specifically during tournament preparations. "Ma'am," Kingsley Shacklebolt approached with what appeared to be a hastily assembled report. "I've got the information you requested about Professor Moody's hiring and arrival timeline." "What did you find?" "According to Dumbledore, Mad-Eye was supposed to arrive at Hogwarts on August 31st for the start of term," Kingsley reported. "But he sent word that he'd been delayed by what he described as dark arts investigations and wouldn't arrive until the last week of September." "That's almost a month delay," Amelia noted. "Did anyone verify the legitimacy of this delay?" "That's just it. Apparently, no one thought to question it. Mad-Eye's reputation for paranoia and his tendency to pursue leads obsessively made the delay seem completely in character. Dumbledore simply arranged for temporary coverage of his classes until he arrived." Amelia frowned. Mad-Eye Moody was many things: paranoid, unpredictable, fiercely independent. But he was also utterly reliable when it came to his professional commitments. A month-long delay without direct personal contact would have been highly unusual behavior, even for him. "When did he finally arrive at Hogwarts?" she asked. "On September 26th, Kingsley replied. "And here's what's interesting. According to the Hogwarts staff I interviewed, he seemed different when he arrived, more paranoid than usual, if that's possible. Several teachers commented that he appeared to be suspicious of everyone, including colleagues he'd worked with for years." "Or," Amelia said slowly, "someone who didn't actually know those colleagues was trying to cover for their lack of familiarity by being universally suspicious." The implications were staggering. If someone had been impersonating Mad-Eye Moody since late September, they would have had access to Hogwarts for over a month before the Goblet selection. They would have been present for all the tournament preparations, would have had opportunities to study the Goblet's magical properties, and would have been perfectly positioned to ensure Harry Potter's name was entered at exactly the right moment. "Ma'am," Williamson called from across the room, "I think I've found something else. You remember how we couldn't identify the magical signature on the office break-ins at Crouch Senior's department? Yes? I've been comparing it to the magical resonance readings we took from the Goblet tampering. They're not identical, but there are similarities. Specifically, both show evidence of advanced transfiguration work and what looks like extended exposure to Polyjuice Potion." Amelia felt the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. Polyjuice Potion would explain the signature inconsistencies and the suspicious behavior. It would explain how someone could impersonate ministry employees for brief visits and maintain a longer impersonation of Mad-Eye Moody. And it would explain why Barty Crouch Sr. had seemed oddly detached and inconsistent during his interview. "How long can Polyjuice Potion maintain an impersonation?" she asked. "With regular doses, indefinitely," Williamson replied. "But it requires a constant supply of the target's DNA and considerable brewing skill. We're talking about someone with advanced potions knowledge and regular access to their victims." "Or victims?" Amelia corrected grimly. If they were dealing with multiple impersonations, it suggested a level of planning and resources that pointed to organized criminal activity rather than individual malice. "Madam Bones?" Tonks approached with a new file. "I've been reviewing the security clearances for the foreign delegations, and I found some irregularities there as well." "What kind of irregularities?" "Both Beauxbatons and Durmstrang requested additional security briefings about Hogwarts's defensive capabilities. Not unusual for visiting schools, but the specific information they requested was oddly detailed. Ward anchoring points, emergency evacuation procedures, the location and magical properties of various protective barriers. Information that would be useful for someone planning to breach Hogwarts's security," Amelia observed. "Exactly. And here's the thing. The requests came through official channels, but were filed by people whose names don't appear in either school's faculty directories. When I tried to contact these individuals directly, both schools claimed no knowledge of the requests." Amelia stood quietly for a moment, absorbing the full scope of what they had uncovered. This wasn't a case of magical negligence that had accidentally endangered Harry Potter. This was a carefully orchestrated conspiracy involving multiple impersonations, document forgery, security breaches, and systematic intelligence gathering. Someone had spent months preparing to ensure that Harry Potter would be selected as a fourth champion. They had infiltrated the ministry, compromised tournament officials, and gathered detailed intelligence about Hogwarts's defenses. And they had done it all while maintaining perfect operational security until now. The question was no longer whether Harry Potter had been deliberately targeted. The question was, who was behind this operation, and what did they ultimately plan to do with him once the tournament provided them with the perfect opportunity? "I want full background investigations on every person who had contact with the tournament planning," Amelia ordered. "I want polyjuice detection protocols run on all current ministry employees with access to sensitive information. And I want a team dispatched to verify the current location and identity of the real Mad-Eye Moody." As her team dispersed to execute these orders, Amelia remained in the war room, staring at the web of connections and deceptions they had uncovered. Somewhere in this maze of false identities and forged documents was a plan that required Harry Potter to be isolated, vulnerable, and bound by magical compulsion to participate in a deadly competition. Or she intended to unravel that plan before they could complete whatever they had started. But time was running out, and she had the distinct feeling that she was playing catch-up in a game where the other side had been planning their moves for months. Chapter 5. The Headmaster's Secrets. The formal interview room in the Ministry's Department of Magical Law Enforcement had been designed to be intimidating. Stark walls, harsh lighting, and a single table with chairs positioned to create psychological pressure on subjects under investigation. Amelia Bones had conducted hundreds of interviews in this room over her career, but she had never questioned someone whose decisions had shaped the wizarding world quite as profoundly as Albus Dumbledore. The elderly headmaster sat across from her, with his characteristic calm, to his blue eyes twinkling behind half-moon spectacles, despite the gravity of the situation. To his left sat his legal representative from the Wizengamot's Advisory Council, and to his right, somewhat unexpectedly, sat Professor McGonagall, whom Dumbledore had requested as a witness to the proceedings. "Headmaster Dumbledore," Amelia began, consulting the formal charges that had brought them to this point, "you are here today to answer questions regarding potential magical negligence child endangerment, and violation of proper guardianship protocols in the case of Harry James Potter. Do you understand the nature of these charges?" "I do, Madam Bones," Dumbledore replied, his voice carrying its usual gentle authority. "Though I must confess, I am somewhat puzzled by the suggestion that my actions regarding Harry's welfare have been anything other than protective." Amelia studied him carefully. In her experience, subjects who maintained complete composure during formal investigations were either entirely innocent or exceptionally skilled at deception. Given the evidence her team had uncovered, she was leaning toward the latter. "Headmaster, given the serious nature of these charges and the potential implications for child welfare policy throughout the wizarding world, this interview will be conducted under Veritaserum protocols. Do you consent to this procedure?" For the first time, something flickered behind Dumbledore's eyes. Not fear, exactly, but a calculation that made Amelia's professional instincts sharpen. After a long pause, he nodded. "I have nothing to hide regarding my care for Harry Potter," he said. "I consent to Veritaserum administration." The truth serum took effect within minutes, and Amelia watched as the slight tension in Dumbledore's shoulders relaxed, his expression becoming more open and unguarded than she had ever seen it. "State your full name and position for the record," she began with the standard protocol. "Albus Percival, Wulfric, Brian Dumbledore, Headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot, and Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards." "Headmaster Dumbledore, on the night of November 1st, 1981, did you personally place the infant Harry Potter with his relatives, or the Dursley family?" "Yes." "Were you aware at the time that the Dursley family held hostile feelings toward magic and magical people?" "Yes. I had observed their behavior toward Harry's mother, Lily, and their general attitude toward anything they considered abnormal." Amelia felt her first surge of anger, but kept her voice level. "Did you consider alternative placement options for Harry Potter?" "Yes. There were several magical families who would have welcomed him, and I received numerous requests to adopt or foster the child." "Why did you choose the Dursleys over these magical families?" "Because of the blood protection." Dumbledore's voice remained steady under the serum's influence. Lily Potter's sacrifice created a powerful protective charm that could only be maintained if Harry lived with her blood relatives. As long as he could call his mother's sister's house home, Voldemort could not touch him there. "Headmaster," Amelia said carefully, "were you aware that this blood protection came at the cost of Harry Potter's emotional and physical well-being?" "I suspected that Harry's childhood would not be pleasant," Dumbledore admitted, and Professor McGonagall made a sharp intake of breath. "But I believed the protection against Voldemort was worth that sacrifice." "You believed it was worth the sacrifice," Amelia repeated. "Did you monitor Harry's treatment by the Dursleys over the years?" "Yes. I had various means of ensuring he was not in mortal danger." "But you did not intervene when your monitoring revealed abuse, malnutrition, and emotional neglect." "I intervened when I felt it was absolutely necessary. But I could not risk undermining the blood protection by removing him from their care." Amelia felt the courtroom fall silent around her. Even under Veritaserum, Dumbledore was admitting to deliberately allowing a child to suffer abuse because he deemed it necessary for a greater purpose. "Headmaster, are you aware of a prophecy concerning Harry Potter and Voldemort?" "Yes." "Please describe this prophecy." Dumbledore's voice took on the formal tone of someone reciting from memory. "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal. But he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives." The silence that followed was absolute. Professor McGonagall had gone completely pale, and even Dumbledore's legal representative looked shaken. "You have known since 1981 that either Harry Potter or Voldemort must kill the other?" Amelia asked. "Yes." "And this knowledge influenced your decisions regarding Harry's upbringing and the dangerous situations he has faced at Hogwarts?" "Yes. Harry needed to develop the strength, courage, and moral character necessary to face Voldemort when the time came. Protecting him completely from all danger would have left him unprepared for his ultimate confrontation." Amelia felt sick. So the incidents in Harry's first 3 years at Hogwarts, the encounter with Professor Quirrell, or the basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets, the events surrounding Sirius Black, you allowed these to happen because you believed they would prepare Harry for a future battle. I ensured that Harry had the opportunity to face these challenges with support available if needed. But yes, I believed each experience would strengthen his ability to eventually face Voldemort, even though each of these experiences could have killed him. Harry's survival of these encounters proved his readiness for greater challenges. Professor McGonagall suddenly stood up, her Scottish accent thick with emotion. "Albus, are you telling me that you've been deliberately putting that boy in danger since he was 11 years old?" Under the truth serum's influence, Dumbledore could only answer honestly. "I have been ensuring that Harry encounters the challenges necessary to prepare him for his destiny." "Yes." "And what about Harry's right to a normal childhood?" Amelia demanded. "What about his right to safety, to proper guardianship, to adults who put his immediate welfare above abstract concepts of destiny?" "Harry's destiny makes normal childhood impossible," Dumbledore replied. "The prophecy ensures that he and Voldemort must eventually face each other. My responsibility is to ensure he survives that confrontation, not to provide him with a conventional upbringing." Amelia stood and began pacing, her professional composure strained to the breaking point. "Headmaster, did you block or discourage attempts by other adults to investigate Harry's welfare or provide him with alternative support?" "When such attempts threatened to interfere with Harry's necessary development or compromise his protection, yes." "Can you provide specific examples?" "I discouraged Minerva from pursuing her concerns about the Dursleys. I declined offers from the Weasley family to formally adopt Harry. I redirected ministry inquiries about his summer placement. I ensured that his legal guardian status remained ambiguous to prevent outside interference." Professor McGonagall sank back into her chair, looking as though she had aged years in the past few minutes. "I tried to tell you," she whispered. "I watched them for a day, and I told you they were the worst sort of muggles imaginable. But you said it was for the best." "Minerva's concerns were noted," Dumbledore said, "but the blood protection superseded all other considerations." Amelia returned to her seat, struggling to maintain her professional demeanor in the face of such callous admissions. "Headmaster, do you believe Voldemort will return?" "I have believed since 1991 that Voldemort's return was inevitable. The events of Harry's first year confirmed this." "And you view the current Triwizard Tournament situation as part of Harry's preparation for this return?" "I had hoped the tournament would provide Harry with additional opportunities to develop his magical skills and personal strength. Oh yes, even though someone clearly manipulated the tournament to ensure Harry's participation against his will. The magical binding of the goblet ensures that Harry must compete. Rather than seeing this as entirely negative, I prefer to view it as another opportunity for growth." Amelia felt her last vestige of professional restraint slip away. "Headmaster, let me be absolutely clear about what you have just admitted under truth serum. You knowingly placed a child with abusive relatives because you valued magical protection over his well-being. You deliberately exposed him to life-threatening situations throughout his school years because you believed suffering would strengthen his character. You blocked attempts by caring adults to provide him with proper support because it might interfere with your plans for his development. And now, faced with evidence that someone has criminally manipulated a deadly tournament to force his participation, Your primary concern is how this might benefit his preparation for a future battle. That is an accurate summary of my reasoning. Yes. And you see nothing wrong with this approach to child welfare? I see it as the most effective means of ensuring Harry Potter survives to fulfill the prophecy and protect the wizarding world from Voldemort. The silence that followed was broken only by Professor McGonagall's quiet sobbing. Even Dumbledore's legal representative looked horrified by what had been revealed. "Headmaster," Amelia said, her voice deadly quiet, "you have just confessed to systematic child endangerment, abuse by proxy, obstruction of proper guardianship procedures, and conspiracy to place a minor in mortal danger. You have admitted that every decision you made regarding Harry Potter's welfare was subordinated to your personal interpretation of a prophecy and your belief that suffering would strengthen his character." She turned to the court recorder. "Let the record show that Albus Dumbledore, under the influence of Veritaserum, has confessed to treating Harry Potter not as a child deserving protection and care, but as a weapon to be forged through deliberate exposure to trauma and danger." As the truth serum began to wear off, and awareness returned to Dumbledore's eyes, that Amelia saw something she had never expected to see in the great wizard's face, the dawning realization that his carefully constructed justifications sounded monstrous when spoken aloud without the benefit of his usual eloquent rhetoric. "The Department of Magical Law Enforcement will be filing formal charges," Amelia announced, "and Harry Potter will be removed from your authority, effective immediately, while this court determines whether you are fit to hold any position of responsibility over magical children." The great Albus Dumbledore sat in stunned silence as the weight of his revealed secrets settled around him like chains. Chapter 6, International Complications. The morning of November 4th brought with it a snowstorm of international correspondence that threatened to bury Amelia Bones's investigation beneath an avalanche of diplomatic protests, legal challenges, and barely veiled threats. Her office on Level 2 had been transformed into a crisis management center, with Owl Post arriving every few minutes, and the Flu network glowing constantly with incoming calls from magical governments across Europe. "Madam Bones," called her assistant, looking harried as she sorted through the latest batch of official communications. "The French ministry's ambassador is demanding an immediate audience. The Bulgarian deputy minister has threatened to file a formal complaint with the International Confederation of Wizards. And Minister Fudge's office has sent 3 urgent requests for a meeting this morning." Amelia rubbed her temples, feeling the familiar pressure that came when a criminal investigation collided with international politics. In her experience, the more powerful interests complained about an investigation, the more likely it was that the investigation was uncovering something they preferred to keep hidden. "Schedule the French ambassador for this afternoon," she decided. "Tell the Bulgarian deputy minister that I'll be happy to discuss their concerns once they've reviewed our evidence of criminal activity, and inform Minister Fudge that I'll meet with him at his convenience, provided he understands that this is a criminal investigation, not a diplomatic negotiation." The office door burst open without warning, and Cornelius Fudge himself strode in, his face flushed with anger and his bowler hat slightly askew. Behind him trailed Percy Weasley, looking distinctly uncomfortable as he clutched a thick folder of documents. "Bones," Fudge declared without preamble, "this investigation of yours is threatening to destabilize the entire international magical community. I've just spent 2 hours on emergency flu calls with ministers from 7 different countries, all demanding to know why we're considering cancelling a tournament that represents the largest international cooperation effort in decades." "Minister," Amelia replied calmly, rising from her chair but not moving from behind her desk, "I assume these international partners have been briefed on the evidence of criminal conspiracy and child endangerment that necessitated this investigation." "Criminal conspiracy?" Fudge scoffed. "You mean the unfortunate incident with young Potter's name in the goblet? Surely that can be handled through normal disciplinary channels without shutting down the entire tournament." Amelia felt her professional patience beginning to fray. "Minister, I'm referring to evidence of sophisticated identity theft, document forgery, ministry infiltration, security breaches at Hogwarts, and a months-long conspiracy to force a minor child into a potentially lethal competition. These are serious criminal charges, not disciplinary matters. Yes, well, Fudge said, waving his hand dismissively. What, I'm sure all of that can be sorted out after the tournament concludes. The important thing now is maintaining international relations and fulfilling our commitments to our partner nations. The important thing, Amelia said, her voice taking on the dangerous quiet that her subordinates had learned to recognize, is ensuring that a 14-year-old boy is not murdered by criminals who have spent months planning to use this tournament for their own purposes. Percy Weasley cleared his throat nervously. Madam Bones, if I might, the international legal implications are quite complex. The tournament contracts include penalties for cancellation that could cost the Ministry millions of galleons, and the diplomatic consequences could affect trade relationships for years. Mr. Weasley, Amelia replied, I'm sure the financial and diplomatic consequences are significant, but I would remind you that the Department of Magical Law Enforcement's primary responsibility is protecting British magical citizens from criminal activity, not maintaining trade relationships. But surely, Fudge interjected, young Potter can be adequately protected without cancelling the entire tournament. Extra security, modified tasks, whatever is necessary. The show must go on, as they say. Amelia stared at the minister, feeling a familiar disgust at the willingness of politicians to compromise child safety for the sake of convenience. Minister, are you ordering me to cease this investigation and allow the tournament to proceed, despite evidence of ongoing criminal conspiracy? Fudge's face went an even deeper shade of red. I'm not ordering anything. I'm simply suggesting that perhaps your investigation has become overzealous, and that a more balanced approach might serve everyone's interests better. Everyone except Harry Potter, you mean? Now see here, Bones. The conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock on the door, followed immediately by the entrance of Kingsley Shacklebolt, who looked unusually grim. Madam Bones, he said, glancing uncertainly at Minister Fudge. The International Confederation of Wizards has just sent an official communication. They're threatening to impose sanctions on the British Ministry if we cancel the tournament without what they call extraordinary justification. What kind of sanctions? Fudge demanded. Trade restrictions, exclusion from international magical cooperation agreements, and potential review of our membership status in the Confederation, Kingsley replied. They're also threatening to move all future international events away from British soil. Amelia felt the political trap closing around her investigation. The criminal conspiracy she was uncovering was real and serious, but the international community was more concerned with maintaining their carefully planned celebration than with protecting one British child. There's more, Kingsley continued. I've been in contact with my counterparts in other magical law enforcement agencies. The French Aura Office has officially requested that we provide extraordinary security measures for Fleur Delacour, rather than cancelling the tournament. The Bulgarian Ministry has made similar demands regarding Victor Crumb. And what about Harry Potter? Amelia asked. Neither government has expressed any concern for his welfare, Kingsley admitted. Their focus is entirely on protecting their own champions and ensuring the tournament proceeds. Minister Fudge seized on this information. You see, Bones, the international community expects us to provide security, not cancel everything. We can double the guards, increase the safety protocols, whatever you think is necessary. But we cannot simply abandon our international commitments. Minister, Amelia said carefully, are you familiar with the International Convention on Magical Child Protection? Fudge looked blank, but Percy Weasley immediately began flipping through his folder. Ah, yes, Percy said. Established in 1887, I believe. It sets standards for the treatment of magical children in international contexts. Article 7 of that convention, Amelia continued, requires all signatory nations to prioritize child welfare over political or economic considerations when a minor is placed at risk by international agreements. If we proceed with this tournament, despite evidence of a conspiracy targeting Harry Potter, we will be in violation of our treaty obligations." The silence that followed was broken by another knock on the door. This time, Aura Tonks entered with a tall, elegant woman whom Amelia recognized as the French ministry's ambassador to Britain. "Madame Bones," the ambassador said in accented English, "I apologize for the interruption, but I bring urgent communications from my government regarding the tournament situation." "Please, Ambassador, to speak freely. The French ministry wishes to express its deep concern about the potential cancellation of the Triwizard tournament," the ambassador said formally. "However, I must also inform you that our own security review has uncovered some irregularities that we had hoped to address quietly." Amelia's attention sharpened immediately. "What kind of irregularities?" "Our advanced security team noted unusual magical signatures around Hogwarts during their preliminary surveys. Additionally, several individuals who claimed to represent British magical institutions requested detailed information about our delegation's security protocols. But when we attempted to verify their credentials, we discovered they were not who they claimed to be." Minister Fudge went pale. "Are you saying that foreign imposters were gathering intelligence about the tournament?" "That is precisely what I am saying," the ambassador confirmed. "We assumed this was part of Britain's internal security review, and did not wish to create diplomatic difficulties by questioning it directly. But in light of current events, we felt you should be aware." Amelia exchanged glances with Kingsley. More evidence of the sophisticated conspiracy they were uncovering, but this time involving international intelligence gathering. "Ambassador," she said, "would the French ministry be willing to share their security findings with our investigation?" "Under the current circumstances, yes. We are more concerned with ensuring the safety of all participants than with maintaining diplomatic protocols." "Excellent. Kingsley, I want you to coordinate with the French security team immediately. If they have additional evidence of the conspiracy, it could strengthen our case considerably." Minister Fudge was looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Now, see here. If there really is some kind of international criminal conspiracy involved, then we have no choice but to continue the investigation until we've identified and arrested everyone involved," Amelia finished firmly. "Minister, I understand the political and economic pressures you're facing, but I cannot and will not compromise a criminal investigation to preserve diplomatic relationships." "But what about the sanctions, the trade implications, the damage to Britain's international standing?" Amelia stood and walked around her desk to face the minister directly. "Minister, let me ask you a question. What if Harry Potter is killed because we prioritized politics over his safety? How do you think that will affect Britain's international standing? How do you think the wizarding public will react when they learn we had evidence of a conspiracy targeting the boy who lived and chose to ignore it for the sake of a tournament?" Fudge's face went from red to grey. The political calculus was clearly shifting in his mind as he realized that protecting Harry Potter might actually be the safer political choice than protecting the tournament. "Madam Bones," he said finally, "I want you to continue your investigation, but I also want you to explore every possible option for providing adequate security if the tournament must proceed. The international pressure is significant, I understand, Minister. But I want to be absolutely clear. If this investigation reveals that the tournament has been compromised by criminals intent on harming Harry Potter, I will recommend its immediate cancellation, regardless of international pressure." As the various officials filed out of her office, Amelia returned to her desk and stared at the growing stack of international correspondence. The criminal conspiracy she was investigating had clearly anticipated the political complications their actions would create. By forcing Harry into the tournament through a magically binding contract, and then ensuring that cancellation would create massive diplomatic and economic problems, they had created a situation where political pressure would work in their favor. But they had underestimated both Amelia's commitment to child protection and the extent to which other nations' security services had noticed the suspicious activities surrounding the tournament preparations. The investigation was about to expand beyond British magical law into a truly international effort to uncover what was beginning to look like one of the most sophisticated criminal conspiracies in magical history. And somewhere, the people responsible for putting Harry Potter in danger were probably counting on political pressure to protect them from the consequences of their actions. They were about to discover how wrong they were. Chapter 7. The Defense Attorney. The secure communication arrived at Amelia Bones's office at precisely midnight on November 5th, delivered not by owl but by a method she had never encountered in 23 years of magical law enforcement. The message simply materialized on her desk in a shimmer of silver light, sealed with protective charms so sophisticated that her security wards didn't even register its presence until it had fully appeared. Amelia stared at the letter for several minutes before touching it. In her line of work, mysterious communications were rarely good news, and given the international conspiracy she was currently investigating, caution was more than warranted. But something about the magical signature felt familiar, though she couldn't place it immediately. She cast every detection charm she knew, finding no traces of dark magic, curse work, or dangerous enchantments. Finally, she opened the letter with her wand at the ready. Madam Bones, you don't know me personally, but you know my name and my reputation. I am writing to offer testimony regarding Harry Potter's legal status and the decisions made concerning his care since 1981. I have information that is crucial to your current investigation, including documentary evidence that Dumbledore's authority over Harry was assumed without legal basis. I cannot meet with you in person for obvious reasons, but if you are willing to hear testimony from someone who was present during the relevant events, please cast a Patronus with the message, "Justice for Harry," tonight at exactly 1 a.m. I will contact you through secure, magical means. I realize this is irregular, but the boy's welfare is more important than protocol. And Madam Bones, I should mention that I have been following your investigation through various channels. You are the first person in authority who seems to understand that Harry's repeated endangerment is not coincidental. Yours in the pursuit of justice, a friend who failed him once and will not do so again. Amelia read the letter 3 times before the magical signature finally clicked into place. The sophisticated protective charms, the careful legal language, the reference to being present during relevant events. This was from Sirius Black. She glanced at the clock on her office wall. 12:47 a.m. If she was going to respond, she had 13 minutes to decide whether to trust a convicted murderer. No, she corrected herself. A man who had been wrongfully imprisoned and was now a fugitive seeking to help his godson. At 12:58 a.m., she cast her Patronus, a lynx, and spoke the requested message. The response came immediately in the form of a second letter that materialized as the first had, this time glowing briefly with the same silver light as her Patronus. Thank you. Please ensure your office is secure against eavesdropping. This conversation will be magically protected, but I need to know that you are alone and that ministry surveillance is disabled. Amelia quickly activated her office's highest security protocols, spells that created a complete magical dead zone around her room and prevented any form of monitoring or recording. When the protections were in place, a third letter appeared. I am going to establish a protected communication link. This will allow us to correspond in real time without risk of interception. Do not attempt to trace this connection. For both our protection, my location must remain hidden. Are you ready to proceed? Amelia wrote yes on a piece of parchment, and the word immediately vanished from the page. A moment later, new text appeared in handwriting that was not her own. Excellent. First, let me establish my credibility. I am Sirius Black, Harry Potter's godfather, wrongfully imprisoned for 12 years for crimes committed by Peter Pettigrew, who is very much alive and currently in hiding. You already know this, as the Ministry's recent review confirmed my innocence. What you may not know is that I was present on the night Harry was placed with the Dursleys, and I have detailed knowledge of decisions made that night that violated both the law and the wishes of Harry's parents. Amelia wrote back, "What evidence can you provide?" James and Lily Potter's will, filed with Gringotts on October 29th, 1981, 2 days before their death. I have a copy, obtained through my legal rights as Harry's named godfather. This will explicitly excludes the Dursley family from guardianship consideration and names 3 preferred guardians, in order of preference: myself, Remus Lupin, and Alice Longbottom. The Dursleys are specifically mentioned as being unsuitable due to their hostility toward magic. Amelia felt her pulse quicken. Dumbledore had no legal authority to override a properly filed will. Correct. But it gets worse. I was present when Dumbledore, McGonagall, and Hagrid delivered Harry to Privet Drive on November 1st, 1981. I argued against the placement, citing James and Lily's will and the Dursleys' obvious unsuitability, as Dumbledore acknowledged that he was aware of the will, but claimed that the blood protection superseded all other considerations. When I threatened to challenge his decision legally, he informed me that my rights as godfather had been suspended, pending investigation of my supposed crimes. "But you were never formally charged at that time," Amelia wrote. Exactly. Dumbledore somehow arranged for my godfather rights to be suspended before I was even arrested, let alone tried or convicted. This suggests he knew in advance what was going to happen and had prepared to remove any legal obstacles to his placement decision. Amelia stared at the implications. If Sirius was telling the truth, Dumbledore had not only violated the Potter's will, but had manipulated the legal system to ensure no one could challenge him. "What other evidence do you have?" she wrote. "I have been attempting to contact Harry or arrange for his welfare to be monitored independently for over a year now, since my escape from Azkaban. Every attempt has been blocked. Letters I've sent through various channels never reach him. Attempts to arrange for neutral parties to check on his welfare have been intercepted. Even my attempts to provide him with financial support from his parents' estate have been rejected by Gringotts, who cite guardian objections, despite the fact that Harry has no legally appointed guardian. Dumbledore has been blocking your attempts to help Harry? Consistently and systematically. I have documentation of 17 separate attempts to either contact Harry directly or arrange for his welfare to be independently monitored, all blocked, but all with the same justification, that contact with me would be disruptive to Harry's development and contrary to his best interests. Amelia felt her anger building. The pattern was clear. Dumbledore had isolated Harry from anyone who might challenge his decisions or provide alternative support. "Mr. Black," she wrote, "are you willing to provide formal testimony under veritaserum regarding these matters?" "I am. But there's more you need to know. I have reason to believe that Dumbledore has been aware of Voldemort's survival since 1991 and has been deliberately exposing Harry to danger as what he calls preparation for an eventual confrontation. But I can provide specific examples of incidents where Dumbledore had advance knowledge of threats to Harry, but chose not to intervene until after Harry had faced the danger himself." "What kind of examples?" "The Philosopher's Stone in Harry's first year. I have evidence that Dumbledore was tracking Quirrell's suspicious behavior months before Harry encountered him, but chose not to act. The Chamber of Secrets in Harry's second year. Dumbledore suspected from the beginning that it was connected to Voldemort, but allowed Harry to investigate rather than handling it through adult channels. Even last year's events with Pettigrew. Dumbledore could have captured Pettigrew easily once he learned the truth, but instead allowed a situation to develop where Harry was placed in direct danger. Amelia was beginning to see a pattern that went far beyond the current tournament situation. You believe Dumbledore has been systematically placing Harry in danger? I believe Dumbledore has been systematically ensuring that Harry faces progressively greater challenges with minimal adult support, ostensibly to build his character, but actually to prepare him for some future confrontation with Voldemort. The tournament situation fits this pattern perfectly. Harry bound by magical compulsion to face deadly challenges, while the adult who should be protecting him focuses on the educational value of the experience. Mr. Black, I need to ask directly, do you believe the current tournament situation poses a genuine threat to Harry's life? I believe someone is using the tournament to get Harry into a position where he can be killed or kidnapped. The magical binding ensures he cannot withdraw, and the international attention makes it difficult for anyone to intervene without causing a diplomatic incident. It's a perfect trap, and I suspect whoever arranged it knows about the prophecy connecting Harry and Voldemort. What prophecy? Asked Dumbledore. Under Veritaserum, he will tell you about a prophecy made before Harry's birth that connects his fate to Voldemort's. This prophecy is the real reason Dumbledore has been treating Harry as a weapon to be forged rather than a child to be protected. Amelia stared at the parchment, the pieces of a larger puzzle falling into place. The prophecy Dumbledore had revealed under Veritaserum, his admission that Harry's suffering was necessary preparation, the systematic isolation from potential advocates. It all fit together into a picture of calculated manipulation spanning 13 years. Mr. Black, she wrote, would you be willing to formally petition for guardianship of Harry Potter? I would be honored to do so. Harry is my godson, named as such in his parents' will, and I love him as if he were my own child. More importantly, I would put his welfare and happiness above any abstract concept of destiny or greater good. He deserves to have an adult in his life who sees him as a child to be protected rather than a weapon to be prepared for battle. The legal complications of your fugitive status would be significant. I am prepared to surrender myself to ministry custody, if necessary, to secure Harry's welfare. My freedom is less important than his safety. However, I would hope that a formal review of my case, given the new evidence about Pettigrew and the irregularities in my original imprisonment, might resolve my legal status more favorably. Amelia considered this. Sirius Black's testimony could be devastating to Dumbledore's position, and his legal standing as Harry's named godfather could provide the basis for challenging Dumbledore's assumed authority. But it would also create a media and political firestorm that could overshadow the tournament investigation. Mr. Black, I am prepared to accept your testimony and to pursue your petition for guardianship through proper legal channels. However, I must warn you that this will likely become very public very quickly. Madame Bones, I have spent 12 years in Azkaban for crimes I didn't commit. I have watched my godson suffer abuse and endangerment while I was powerless to help him. If going public with the truth is what it takes to protect Harry, then I welcome the publicity. The wizarding world needs to know what has been done to that boy in the name of protecting him. Then I suggest we arrange for you to provide formal testimony as soon as possible. The more evidence I have of the systematic violations of Harry's rights, the stronger my case becomes for removing him from the current dangerous situation. Thank you, Madam Bones. I had heard that you were someone who put justice above politics and law above convenience. I am grateful that Harry finally has an advocate who sees him as a child, deserving protection rather than a symbol to be managed. As the magical communication faded and the letters dissolved back into ordinary parchment, Amelia sat back in her chair and contemplated the magnitude of what she had just learned. The investigation that had begun with questions about tournament security had uncovered something far more serious. A 13-year conspiracy to manipulate and endanger Harry Potter, orchestrated by the one man everyone trusted to protect him. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of formally challenging Albus Dumbledore's authority over Harry Potter and establishing Sirius Black's legal rights as the boy's godfather. It was going to be the most consequential case of her career, and she intended to ensure that justice finally prevailed over the arrogant assumption that the powerful knew better than the law what was best for those under their control. Chapter 8. The Student Rebellion. The news spread through Hogwarts like wildfire, carried by whispered conversations in corridors, hastily scribbled notes passed between classes, and the kind of urgent gossip that only a school full of teenagers could generate. By the morning of November 6th, every student in the castle knew that the Ministry was conducting a formal investigation into the Triwizard Tournament, or that Harry Potter was at the center of criminal conspiracy charges, and that even Professor Dumbledore had been questioned under veritaserum. Hermione Granger stood in the Gryffindor common room at 7 a.m., surrounded by a crowd of students from all 4 houses who had somehow managed to gain entry, despite the usual inter-house restrictions. Her hair was more disheveled than usual, her eyes bright with the kind of fierce determination that Ron and Harry had learned to both admire and fear. "This isn't about house loyalties or tournament pride," she was saying to the assembled group, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had clearly spent the entire night researching and planning. "This is about the fact that our school has been systematically placing students in danger for years. And we've all just accepted it as normal because it was happening to Harry Potter." "But it's not just Harry," interrupted Susan Bones, whose aunt's investigation had sparked this entire revelation. "Think about it. How many times have we all been in situations where we could have been seriously hurt or killed, and the adults just let it happen?" A murmur of recognition ran through the crowd. These were students who had lived through a possessed teacher trying to kill their classmate, a basilisk loose in the school for months, and dementors stalking the grounds. When viewed through the lens of systematic negligence rather than exciting adventures, their collective school experience took on a much darker cast. "First year," said Dean Thomas, counting on his fingers, "we had a 3-headed dog in a corridor that students use regularly. And a 3-headed dog. What if a first year had gotten lost and wandered in there?" "Second year," added Hannah Abbott, "the entire school was essentially under siege from a monster that could kill you just by looking at you, and instead of closing the school or calling in professional help, they kept us here and let a 12-year-old go into the Chamber of Secrets alone." "Third year," Neville Longbottom said quietly from where he sat near the fireplace. "Soul-sucking monsters were stationed around the school as protection, and when they attacked students, we were told it was just an unfortunate side effect." The silence that followed Neville's words was profound. Many of these students had experienced Dementor attacks firsthand, had felt their happiness drain away and their worst memories surface, which all in the name of security measures that the adults assured them were necessary. "So what do we do?" asked Ernie Macmillan from Hufflepuff. "We can't exactly fire the headmaster." "We can demand accountability," Hermione replied, pulling out a scroll of parchment covered in dense writing. "I've been researching student rights in magical education all night. Did you know that under the Educational Welfare Act of 1749, students have the right to petition the Wizengamot for review of unsafe educational practices, and that if more than 25% of a school's student body sign such a petition, the Wizengamot is required to hold emergency hearings?" "How many students do we need?" asked Terry Boot from Ravenclaw. "Hogwarts has approximately 800 students," Hermione calculated quickly. "We need 200 signatures minimum, but the more we have, the stronger the impact." "You'll have mine," said Harry Potter quietly from where he had been sitting in silence near the portrait hole. Every head turned toward him as he stood up, his green eyes showing a mixture of gratitude and determination. "I never asked to be in this tournament, and I certainly never asked for anyone to be hurt because of me. If there's a way to make sure this doesn't happen to other students, I want to help." The show of hands that followed was immediate and unanimous. Students who had never agreed on anything, Slytherins who usually antagonized Gryffindors, Ravenclaws who typically found Hufflepuffs too sentimental, were united in their recognition that their safety had been treated as secondary to other considerations for far too long. "There's something else," said Luna Lovegood, speaking for the first time from her perch on the windowsill, where she had been observing the proceedings with her characteristic dreamy focus. "Daddy's been investigating some of these issues for the Quibbler. He has sources in the ministry who've been telling him about Madam Bones's investigation. Would you like me to ask him to publish the truth about what's been happening here?" "The Daily Prophet would never print anything that made Dumbledore look bad," Ron said with disgust. "They worship him too much." "That's exactly why we need the Quibbler," Luna replied serenely. "Daddy doesn't care about protecting powerful people's reputations. He cares about protecting children." As students began signing Hermione's petition with enthusiasm, art organizing into house-based committees to spread the word and gather more signatures, the portrait hole opened to admit Professor McGonagall. The elderly witch looked around the crowded common room with surprise, taking in the mixed house gathering and the obvious air of organized rebellion. "Miss Granger," she said carefully, "might I ask what this gathering is about?" "We're exercising our legal rights as magical education consumers, Professor," Hermione replied, holding up her petition. "We're petitioning the Wizengamot for a formal review of Hogwarts' safety practices and demanding that students have a voice in decisions that affect our welfare." Professor McGonagall was quiet for a long moment, her sharp eyes moving from face to face, seeing the determination and unity that had replaced the usual inter-house tensions. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than usual. "Miss Granger, students, I want you to know that many of the faculty have been troubled by some of the revelations that have come to light during Madam Bones's investigation. We entered teaching because we wanted to protect and educate children, not because we wanted to put them in danger." "Then help us," Harry said directly. "Don't make us do this alone." McGonagall glanced around the room once more, then stepped fully inside and closed the portrait hole behind her. "What kind of help do you need?" By midday, the student rebellion had evolved from a common room meeting into a school-wide movement that had the faculty in chaos and the administration in crisis. Hermione's petition had grown to over 400 signatures, as students who had initially been hesitant were swayed by testimonials from their peers about dangerous situations they had all survived. Neville Longbottom had become an unexpected leader in the movement when he spoke publicly about his parents' fate at the hands of Bellatrix Lestrange and the Ministry's failure to protect Auror families during the First War. His quiet testimony about institutional failures resonating deeply with students who were beginning to see patterns of adult negligence in their own experiences. "My parents were tortured into insanity, defending people who then forgot about them," Neville told a gathering in the Great Hall during lunch. "They're in St. Mungo's now, and they don't even recognize me when I visit. But you know what I've learned from Madam Bones's investigation? The Ministry knew there were security breaches. They knew Auror families were being targeted, and they did nothing to protect the people who were risking their lives to protect everyone else." His words hung heavy in the air, connecting the current tournament situation to a broader pattern of institutional failure that stretched back years before any of them had been born. "That's what's happening to Harry now," Neville continued. "The adults know there's a conspiracy. They know someone is trying to hurt him, but instead of protecting him, they're debating politics and international relations and making him compete anyway." The response was a standing ovation that lasted several minutes and left even the Slytherin table applauding, albeit somewhat reluctantly. By afternoon, the student movement had attracted attention far beyond the castle walls. Luna Lovegood had convinced her father to publish an emergency edition of The Quibbler, featuring student testimonials about dangerous incidents at Hogwarts, complete with a reproduction of Hermione's petition and a call for adults throughout the wizarding world to support student safety initiatives. The Quibbler's circulation was typically modest, but this emergency edition was being passed from hand to hand throughout Diagon Alley, discussed in pubs and workplaces, and generating the kind of grassroots support that politicians feared most, organized citizens demanding accountability from their institutions. Professor Snape had attempted to confiscate copies of the Quibbler from Slytherin students, was only to discover that they had hidden additional copies throughout their dormitories and were sharing them via charmed parchment networks that reproduced the articles automatically. His usual intimidation tactics were proving ineffective against students who were no longer isolated in their concerns, but part of a unified movement. "The students are making very valid points, Severus," Professor Flitwick had said, when Snape complained during an emergency faculty meeting. "Perhaps instead of trying to suppress their voices, we should be listening to their concerns." "They're children," Snape had replied dismissively. "They don't understand the complexities of the situation." "They understand that they've been placed in danger repeatedly," Professor Sprout had interjected. "And they understand that the adults who should be protecting them have consistently prioritized other considerations over their safety. That seems like a fairly sophisticated understanding to me." The faculty meeting had devolved into the same kind of divided loyalties that were affecting the student body, with teachers forced to choose between supporting their longtime colleague and headmaster or acknowledging that their students' complaints had merit. By evening, the student rebellion had forced an emergency response from the Wizengamot itself. The sheer number of signatures on the petition, combined with the public attention generated by the Quibbler's coverage, had made it impossible for the magical government to ignore the situation. Amelia Bones received word at 6 p.m. that an emergency session of the Wizengamot had been called for the following morning to address the student petition and determine whether immediate action was required to protect Hogwarts students. As she read the notice, she felt a surge of pride in the young people who had refused to accept that their safety was negotiable. They had accomplished something that weeks of investigation and political maneuvering had failed to achieve. They had made the protection of children a public priority that could not be ignored or dismissed. The adults in charge had spent days debating international relations, tournament contracts, and political consequences. The students had simply asked, "Why are you willing to let children be hurt?" It was a question that demanded an answer, and tomorrow, the Wizengamot would be required to provide one. Harry Potter sat in the Gryffindor common room that evening, surrounded by friends from all 4 houses who had spent the day fighting for his right to safety and childhood. For the first time since his name had come out of the Goblet of Fire, he felt like he wasn't facing the danger alone. The students of Hogwarts had shown the adults something important. When children's lives were at stake, house rivalries, political considerations, and institutional loyalties became irrelevant. All that mattered was protecting the people who couldn't protect themselves. And finally, it seemed like the adults might be ready to listen. Chapter 9. The Truth About Mad-Eye. The breakthrough came at 4 a.m. on November 7th, when Aura Williamson's detailed magical signature analysis finally yielded results that made Amelia Bones's blood run cold. She had been dozing in her office chair, surrounded by case files and empty coffee cups, when Williamson burst through her door with an expression of barely controlled panic. "Madam Bones," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to get to Hogwarts immediately, and we need a full tactical team." Amelia was instantly alert. In 23 years of magical law enforcement, she had learned to recognize the tone that meant lives were in immediate danger. "What did you find?" "The magical signature analysis on the polyjuice residue from the goblet tampering," Williamson said, spreading out his charts on her desk. "I've been comparing it against every known magical signature in our database, looking for matches or patterns. I found one." He pointed to a complex magical fingerprint displayed on the parchment. "This magical signature belongs to Barty Crouch, Jr." Amelia stared at the analysis, her mind racing through the implications. Barty Crouch, Jr. died in Azkaban 12 years ago. "That's what everyone believes," Williamson replied grimly. "But magical signatures don't lie, Madam Bones. This is definitely his magical fingerprint, and it's recent, within the last few days." "Are you telling me that Barty Crouch, Jr. is alive and was involved in tampering with the Goblet of Fire?" "I'm telling you that Barty Crouch, Jr. is alive has been using Polyjuice Potion extensively, and based on the magical traces we've found, he's been at Hogwarts for weeks. The pieces clicked together in Amelia's mind with sickening clarity. With the sophisticated Polyjuice work, the intimate knowledge of Hogwarts' defenses, the suspicious behavior patterns they had identified in their investigation, if Barty Crouch Jr. was alive and at Hogwarts, there was only one logical explanation. "Mad-Eye Moody," she said. "That's my assessment as well," Williamson confirmed. "The timeline fits perfectly. Crouch Jr. would have needed weeks to study Moody's behavior, mannerisms, and magical techniques to maintain a convincing impersonation. And if he's been impersonating Moody since late September, he would have had access to everything," Amelia finished. "The Goblet, the tournament preparations, Harry Potter himself. And if Crouch Jr. is alive and free, that means his father has been compromised as well," Williamson said. "The Imperious Curse would explain Crouch Sr.'s odd behavior during questioning." Amelia stood and began pacing, her mind working through the strategic implications. If Barty Crouch Jr. was alive and had been impersonating Mad-Eye Moody for weeks, then they were dealing with something far more serious than child endangerment or magical negligence. They were dealing with a Death Eater conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of the Ministry. "Assemble a tactical team," she ordered. "Full Auror response, ward breakers, curse specialists, the works. If we're about to confront Barty Crouch Jr., we need to assume he's extremely dangerous and probably desperate." "There's something else," Williamson added hesitantly. "If Crouch Jr. is alive and free, and if he's been orchestrating this tournament conspiracy, then he's working for Voldemort," Amelia concluded, "and this entire situation has been designed to deliver Harry Potter to the Dark Lord." The tactical team assembled within 30 minutes, comprised of 12 of the Ministry's most experienced Aurors, plus specialists in curse-breaking and dark magic detection. As they prepared to depart for Hogwarts, Amelia found herself thinking about all the close calls and near misses that had characterized their investigation. If they had moved more slowly, if the student rebellion hadn't forced their hand, Harry Potter might have been delivered to Voldemort without anyone understanding what was happening until it was too late. The confrontation, when it came, was both more dramatic and more pathetic than Amelia had anticipated. They found Mad-Eye Moody in his office, apparently grading essays in the early morning hours. He looked up as they entered, his magical eye spinning wildly, and for a moment Amelia wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. Then she noticed the slight tremor in his hands, the way he reached instinctively for something that wasn't there, and the expression of barely controlled panic that flickered across his scarred features. "Alastair," she said carefully, "we need to ask you some questions about your whereabouts during the tournament preparation period." "Of course," he replied, but his voice carried a false heartiness that was completely unlike the gruff paranoia that characterized the real Mad-Eye Moody. "Though I have to say, Amelia, this is a bit irregular. But couldn't this wait until morning?" It was the use of her first name that confirmed it. The real Mad-Eye Moody had never called her anything other than Bones in 20 years of professional acquaintance. "Actually, Alastair," she said, drawing her wand, "I think we need to discuss this right now, particularly your recent Polyjuice Potion usage." The transformation was instantaneous. The man she had thought was Mad-Eye Moody lunged for his wand, but 12 trained Aurors were faster. Stunning spells hit him from multiple directions before he could complete his draw, and he collapsed to the floor in a shower of red sparks. "Search everything," Amelia ordered. "I want every inch of this room examined for dark magic, concealed weapons, and Polyjuice brewing equipment." The search revealed a sophisticated magical operation that had been running for weeks. Hidden compartments contained multiple vials of Polyjuice Potion, detailed notes on Mad-Eye Moody's behavior patterns and speech mannerisms, and most chillingly, a large magical trunk with 7 locks that radiated dark magic. "Ma'am," called Auror Shacklebolt from beside the trunk, "you need to see this." The locks on the trunk were beyond anything Amelia had encountered in her career. Dark magic protections layered with curse work that would have killed anyone who tried to force them open. It took their curse-breaking specialist 40 minutes to safely disable the protections, and when the trunk finally opened, it revealed a series of compartments that defied spatial logic. In the bottom compartment, they found Alastair Moody. The real Mad-Eye was alive, but barely conscious, clearly having been subjected to months of imprisonment and magical torture. His famous magical eye was gone, his wooden leg had been removed, and he appeared to have been kept in a state of semi-consciousness to provide the biological material necessary for Polyjuice potion production. "Get him to St. Mungo's immediately," Amelia ordered. "Full medical team, trauma specialists, and I want him under protective custody until we understand the full scope of this conspiracy." As the real Moody was carefully extracted and transported for medical care, Amelia turned her attention to their prisoner. The man who had been impersonating Mad-Eye was slowly regaining consciousness, and as the Polyjuice potion wore off, his features were changing. The transformation was horrifying to watch. The scarred, weathered features of Mad-Eye Moody melted away like wax, revealing a younger face that Amelia recognized from wanted posters and trial records. Barty Crouch Jr. looked much as he had 12 years ago, though his eyes held a madness that spoke of Azkaban and dark magic. "Hello, Amelia," he said, when the transformation was complete, his voice carrying a cultured accent that was nothing like Moody's gruff tones. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out." "Barty Crouch Jr.," she replied formally. "You are under arrest for impersonation of a ministry official, conspiracy to commit child endangerment, assault on an aura, and treason against the wizarding world." "Oh, you're missing the best charges," Crouch Jr. said with a mad grin. "Conspiracy to deliver Harry Potter to the Dark Lord, for instance, or conspiracy to facilitate the return of Lord Voldemort." Amelia felt her blood chill. Even under arrest, even facing a lifetime in Azkaban, Crouch Jr. was talking freely about Voldemort's return. That suggested either complete madness or complete confidence that his capture wouldn't matter. "Mr. Crouch," she said carefully, "I'm placing you under Veritaserum protocols for questioning regarding crimes against the wizarding world." "Please do," he replied with disturbing enthusiasm. "I'm quite proud of my work. The Dark Lord specifically chose me for this mission because of my creativity." The Veritaserum interview that followed was one of the most chilling experiences of Amelia's career. Under the influence of the Truth Serum, Barty Crouch Jr. revealed a conspiracy of breathtaking scope and horrifying implications. He had escaped from Azkaban years earlier with the help of his mother, who had died in his place using Polyjuice potion. He had been kept under house arrest by his father, controlled by the Imperious Curse, until Voldemort had found him and freed him from his father's control, by placing him under Voldemort's control instead. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Manipulate the Triwizard Tournament to ensure Harry Potter won, turn the Triwizard Cup into a portkey, and deliver Harry directly to Voldemort for a resurrection ritual that would restore the Dark Lord to full power. "The Dark Lord has been preparing for his return for months," Crouch Jr. explained under Veritaserum's influence. "He needed Harry Potter's blood for the ritual, and he needed a way to get Harry away from Dumbledore's protection without arousing suspicion. The tournament provided the perfect opportunity. Harry bound by magical compulsion to compete, international attention, preventing interference, and the expectation that champions would face mortal danger." "And your father?" Amelia asked. "Under the Imperious Curse for months," Crouch Jr. replied matter-of-factly. "I needed his authority to manipulate the tournament approval process and ensure that proper oversight was avoided. He's been quite useful, actually. His reputation for rigid adherence to regulations made people trust his judgment about tournament security." "What was supposed to happen to Harry Potter?" "He was supposed to win the tournament, touch the portkey, and be transported to a graveyard where the Dark Lord was waiting. The blood ritual would have restored Voldemort to full power and Harry would have been killed as a demonstration of the Dark Lord's return. Amelia felt sick. The conspiracy had been even more sophisticated than she had imagined, and they had come terrifyingly close to succeeding. "Mr. Crouch," she said, "is Voldemort currently alive?" "Oh, yes," Crouch Jr. replied with disturbing cheerfulness. "Very much alive, though not yet at full power. He's been surviving in a temporary body, gathering followers and preparing for his return. This tournament was supposed to be the culmination of years of planning." "Where is he now?" "I don't know the exact location," Crouch Jr. admitted. "The Dark Lord shared operational details on a need-to-know basis. But he's out there, waiting for me to deliver Harry Potter. When I fail to report back, he'll know something has gone wrong." As the interview concluded and Barty Crouch Jr. was secured for transport to a high-security facility, Amelia sat in Mad Eye's office and contemplated the magnitude of what they had uncovered. They had prevented Harry Potter's kidnapping and probable death, but they had also confirmed that Voldemort was alive and actively planning his return to power. The conspiracy that had begun with questions about tournament security had revealed a threat to the entire wizarding world. The investigation that had started with protecting one child had become a race to prevent the return of the darkest wizard in history. And somewhere out there, Voldemort was learning that his carefully laid plans had been discovered and his most trusted servant captured. The real war, Amelia realized, was about to begin. Chapter 10. The Wizengamot Decides. The full assembly of the Wizengamot had not convened for an emergency session in over 50 years, but the morning of November 8th, 1994, found every purple-robed member of the wizarding world's highest judicial body seated in the ancient courtroom deep beneath the Ministry of Magic. The circular chamber, with its tiered stone benches and chains that usually restrained the most dangerous criminals, had been reconfigured to accommodate what was being called the most significant legal proceeding in modern magical history. Amelia Bones stood at the prosecutor's podium, her case files organized with the precision of someone who understood that the next few hours would reshape how the wizarding world protected its children. Around the courtroom, international observers from 7 magical governments sat in specially conjured gallery seating, their presence a reminder that the decisions made today would resonate far beyond Britain's borders. At the defendant's table, Albus Dumbledore sat with quiet dignity, his usual twinkling demeanor replaced by something more somber and introspective. Beside him, his legal counsel shuffled through documents that all knew would prove inadequate against the mountain of evidence Amelia had assembled. "The Wizengamot will come to order," announced Chief Warlock Cornelius Fudge, his voice carrying across the stone chamber with uncharacteristic gravity. "We convene today in emergency session to address charges of child endangerment, illegal guardianship assumption, obstruction of proper welfare investigations, and conspiracy to place a minor in mortal danger. Additionally, we will hear petitions regarding educational reform and guardianship rights. The prosecution will present its case," Fudge continued, nodding to Amelia. Amelia rose, her voice clear and steady as she addressed the assembled court. "Honorable members of the Wizengamot, over the past week, the Department of Magical Law Enforcement has uncovered a pattern of systematic child endangerment spanning 13 years. At the center of this pattern is Harry James Potter, who has been repeatedly placed in mortal danger by the very institutions and individuals charged with his protection." She gestured to the evidence tables that lined one side of the courtroom. "The evidence will show that from the moment Harry Potter was placed with hostile relatives as an infant, through 3 years of life-threatening incidents at Hogwarts, to his current forced participation in a deadly tournament, every decision regarding his welfare has prioritized abstract concepts of destiny and preparation over his basic rights to safety and proper guardianship." "Objection," Dumbledore's counsel interjected. The defendant's actions were taken in good faith to protect Mr. Potter and the wizarding world from greater threats. "Noted," Chief Warlock Fudge replied. "However, this court will determine whether good intentions justify violations of child protection law. Please continue, Madam Bones." Amelia nodded and continued. The evidence will further show that when a sophisticated criminal conspiracy targeted Harry Potter through manipulation of the Triwizard Tournament, the defendant's response was not to ensure the child's protection, but to view this as another opportunity for character development. A murmur ran through the assembled Wizengamot members. The revelation of Barty Crouch Jr.'s conspiracy and Voldemort's involvement had sent shockwaves through the magical government that was still being felt. I call my first witness, Harry James Potter. Harry rose from the witness section, looking younger than his 14 years despite the formal robes he wore. As he took his place at the witness stand, Amelia could see the nervous tension in his shoulders, but also a quiet determination that spoke to his remarkable resilience. "Mr. Potter," she began gently, "please tell the court about your living situation during the summers between school years." Harry's voice was quiet but clear. "As I live with my aunt and uncle, the Dursleys. They don't like magic. They've told me since I was small that magic was freakish and that I was a burden they had to bear." "Have you ever been physically harmed while in their care?" "Yes. Locked in my room for days at a time, sometimes with no food. Uncle Vernon has hit me when he was angry about magical things. They made me sleep in a cupboard under the stairs until I was 11. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Several Wizengamot members looked visibly shaken by the matter-of-fact way Harry described what was clearly severe abuse. "Mr. Potter, did you ever tell any adult at Hogwarts about your treatment at home?" I didn't know who to tell. Professor Dumbledore said I had to go back there every summer for my protection. He said it was necessary because of my mother's sacrifice." "Were you aware that your parents had made provisions for your care in the event of their death?" Harry looked confused. "No. I was told the Dursleys were my only family." Amelia nodded and turned to address the court. "The evidence will show that James and Lily Potter's will, properly filed with Gringotts, explicitly excluded the Dursley family from guardianship consideration and named 3 preferred guardians." The murmur that followed was louder this time. Dumbledore's counsel made frantic notes, clearly unprepared for this revelation. "I call my next witness, Sirius Black." The appearance of Sirius Black in the witness stand created a sensation. Though his innocence had been established months earlier, this was his first public appearance since his escape from Azkaban. He looked gaunt but determined, his grey eyes fixed on Harry with unmistakable affection. "Mr. Black," Amelia began, "please state your relationship to Harry Potter." "I am his godfather," Sirius replied clearly, "named as such in James and Lily Potter's will, and bound by oath to protect their son should anything happen to them." "Were you consulted about Harry's placement with the Dursley family?" "I was present when Dumbledore, McGonagall, and Hagrid delivered Harry to Privet Drive," I objected strenuously, citing James and Lily's will and the Dursleys' obvious unsuitability. Dumbledore overruled my objections and had my godfather rights suspended before I could challenge the decision legally. "Have you attempted to fulfill your duties as Harry's godfather since your exoneration?" "I have made 17 documented attempts to contact Harry or arrange for his welfare to be independently monitored. All have been blocked, with Dumbledore claiming such contact would be detrimental to Harry's development." Amelia presented the documentation Sirius had provided, each blocked attempt a testament to the systematic isolation Harry had endured. "The defense may cross-examine," she announced. Dumbledore's counsel rose hesitantly. "Mr. Black, given your circumstances, don't you think it might have been prudent to ensure proper adult supervision was in place before attempting contact with a minor?" Sirius's voice was steady but edged with anger. "I think it would have been prudent to ensure Harry had at least one adult in his life who saw him as a child to be protected rather than a weapon to be prepared for battle. The cross-examination was brief and ineffective. Dumbledore's legal team had been unprepared for the scope of evidence against their client. "I call Hermione Granger as representative of the student body," Amelia announced. Hermione approached the witness stand with the same determined confidence she brought to every challenge. Her testimony was devastating in its clarity. "Members of the Wizengamot," she began, "that over 400 students signed our petition requesting your intervention in this matter. We did so because we finally understood that the dangerous situations we've all survived at Hogwarts were not unavoidable accidents, but the result of systematic decisions to expose students to risk." She enumerated the incidents with scholarly precision: the three-headed dog accessible to students, the basilisk allowed to roam the school for months, the Dementors stationed on the grounds despite their documented attacks on students. "We are not asking you to eliminate all risk from magical education," she concluded. "We are asking you to ensure that when students face danger, it is because proper educational safeguards have failed, but not because adults have decided that danger builds character." When Dumbledore finally took the stand in his own defense, his testimony was painful to watch. Under oath, he could not deny the facts that had been presented, but his attempts to justify them fell flat in the face of the evidence. "I have always acted in what I believed to be Harry's best interests and the greater good of the wizarding world," he said. The prophecy connecting Harry and Voldemort meant that conventional approaches to child protection were insufficient. "Headmaster Dumbledore," Amelia replied during her cross-examination, "does the prophecy you reference supersede Harry Potter's legal rights as a minor child?" "The prophecy created extraordinary circumstances that required extraordinary measures." "That is not what I asked. Does any prophecy, or regardless of its content, give you the right to ignore child protection laws?" Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. "No," he finally admitted, "but I believed the stakes justified the risks." "Who made the decision that these stakes justified violating Harry Potter's rights?" "I did." "And who gave you the authority to make that decision on behalf of a child who was never consulted and never consented?" Another long pause. "No one gave me that authority. I assumed it." The final arguments were brief. Dumbledore's defense counsel argued that his client's intentions were noble and that the greater good sometimes required difficult choices. But Amelia argued that good intentions could not excuse systematic violations of child protection law, and that the greater good was best served by protecting the vulnerable from those who claimed to know what was best for them. The Wizengamot deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, Chief Warlock Fudge's voice was grave. "On the charge of child endangerment, we find Albus Dumbledore guilty. On the charge of illegal assumption of guardianship authority, we find him guilty. On the charge of obstruction of proper welfare investigations, we find him guilty." The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps. Dumbledore sat quietly, his hands folded, accepting the verdict with dignity. "The court hereby strips Albus Dumbledore of all authority over Harry Potter's welfare and education," Fudge continued. "But while we recognize his contributions to wizarding society and his genuine belief that his actions served the greater good, we cannot allow good intentions to excuse systematic violations of child protection law. The court grants Sirius Black's petition for guardianship of Harry Potter, contingent upon successful completion of ministry-supervised rehabilitation and family services training. Furthermore, this court hereby establishes the Potter Protection Precedent. No child in the wizarding world may be placed in danger by adult authorities without proper consent, legal representation, and regular welfare monitoring, regardless of prophecy, destiny, or claimed greater good." As the session concluded and the formal pronouncements were read, Amelia watched Harry Potter embrace his godfather for the first time in his memory. The boy who had spent his entire life without proper adult advocacy finally had someone who would put his welfare first. The wizarding world had learned an important lesson, that protecting children from those who would harm them included protecting them from those who claimed their suffering was necessary for noble purposes. Justice, Amelia reflected, was sometimes as simple as ensuring that adults remembered children were people, not symbols to be manipulated for abstract ideals. The law had finally caught up with good intentions, and Harry Potter was finally free to be a child. Chapter 11. New Guardians. The afternoon of November 8th found Harry Potter sitting in the comfortable study of Grimmauld Place, staring at a piece of official parchment that changed everything he had ever known about his life. The document, sealed with the Wizengamot's official crest and signed by Chief Warlock Fudge himself, was elegantly simple in its language. Legal guardianship of Harry James Potter is hereby transferred to Sirius Black, effective immediately, with all rights and responsibilities therein. Still can't quite believe it's real? Sirius asked from where he sat across the room, his own copy of the guardianship papers spread across his desk, alongside what appeared to be a dozen other official documents related to Harry's welfare. I keep thinking someone's going to realize there's been a mistake, Harry admitted, looking up from the parchment. For 14 years, everyone told me that the Dursleys were my only family, and that living with them was the only way to keep me safe. Now I find out my parents never wanted me anywhere near them. Sirius set down his quill and came to sit beside Harry on the worn but comfortable sofa. Your parents knew exactly what kind of people the Dursleys were, Harry. They specifically excluded them from guardianship consideration, because they wanted you to grow up knowing you were loved and valued, not treated as a burden or a freak. Why didn't anyone ever tell me about their will? Because Dumbledore made sure no one had the opportunity, Sirius replied, his voice carrying a bitter edge. He isolated you from everyone who might have challenged his decisions or provided alternative viewpoints. It's a classic manipulation tactic. Control the information, control the person. Harry was quiet for a moment, processing not just the words, but the tone of casual protectiveness in Sirius's voice. It was strange to have an adult speak about his welfare, as if his happiness and well-being were priorities rather than inconvenient complications. Sirius, he said carefully, what happens now? I mean, with Voldemort confirmed to be alive and everything that's happened with the tournament. Now, Sirius said firmly, you get to be a 14-year-old boy whose biggest concerns are homework and Quidditch and whether Hermione will help you with your potions essay. The adults will handle the adult responsibilities, which is how it should have been from the beginning. A knock at the study door interrupted them, followed by the entrance of Amelia Bones. She looked more relaxed than Harry had ever seen her, though her professional bearing remained intact. Mr. Potter, Mr. Black, she greeted them formally, before her expression softened slightly. I wanted to personally oversee the final stages of the transition and brief you both on the new security arrangements. She settled into a chair across from them and opened the thick folder she carried. First, the good news. The Dursleys have been officially notified that their guardianship obligations have been terminated. They were surprisingly relieved, actually. They signed the necessary paperwork without protest and expressed hope that they won't be required to have any further contact with magical affairs. Harry felt a complicated mixture of relief and hurt at this news. Even after everything, some part of him had hoped that his relatives might express some concern for his welfare. The Ministry has also completed its review of your living situation over the past 13 years, Amelia continued. While we cannot undo the harm that was done, we have established a victim services fund that will cover any magical or muggle counseling you might need, as well as educational support to address any gaps in your development. What kind of gaps? Harry asked, genuinely curious. Well, Amelia said gently, children who grow up in emotionally neglectful environments often struggle with things like setting boundaries, recognizing manipulation, and trusting adults. These are skills that can be learned, but it helps to have proper support. Sirius squeezed Harry's shoulder supportively. We'll take it one day at a time, and you'll have all the help you need. Now, Amelia continued, regarding the security situation. With Voldemort's return confirmed and Barty Crouch Jr.'s revelations about ongoing Death Eater activity, we've established new protocols for your protection. She pulled out a detailed map that showed various locations marked with different colored indicators. You'll continue attending Hogwarts, but with enhanced security measures. The school now has a permanent ministry oversight committee to ensure that educational risks are properly evaluated before students are exposed to them. What about Dumbledore? Harry asked. Professor Dumbledore remains headmaster, but he no longer has authority over your education or welfare, Amelia replied. Any decisions regarding your schooling must be approved by your guardian and reviewed by the Ministry Oversight Committee. Additionally, the school has hired 2 additional Defense Against the Dark Arts professors to ensure comprehensive security coverage. 2 additional? Sirius asked with interest. Professor Lupin has agreed to return to provide advanced defensive magic instruction, and we've also hired Aura Tonks as a security liaison who will teach practical protection techniques to all students, Amelia explained. The days of students learning to defend themselves through trial by fire are over. Harry felt a surge of excitement at the news that Lupin would be returning to Hogwarts. His third-year defense professor had been the best teacher he'd ever had, and the idea of learning proper defensive magic felt like a significant improvement over hoping to survive whatever dangerous situation next presented itself. What about the international situation? Sirius asked. The tournament cancellation must have created diplomatic problems. The cancellation was actually handled quite smoothly, Amelia replied with satisfaction. Once the international observers learned about the Death Eater conspiracy and Voldemort's involvement, they were remarkably understanding about Britain's security concerns. The French and Bulgarian ministries have actually praised our thorough investigation and expressed interest in implementing similar child protection protocols in their own magical education systems. And the broader Voldemort threat? Amelia's expression became more serious. That's being handled through proper channels now. The minister has established the Committee for Magical Defense, with myself as chair, to coordinate our response to the confirmed return of you-know-who. We're working with international partners, implementing enhanced security measures, and ensuring that anyone who was involved in his first rise to power is properly monitored. Will I be involved in any of this? Harry asked, though part of him hoped the answer would be no. Your involvement will be limited to providing testimony about your past encounters with Voldemort and participating in enhanced defense training, Amelia replied firmly. You are a 14-year-old boy, not a weapon in a war. The adults will handle the dangerous work. Harry felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. For years he'd been told that his fate was intertwined with Voldemort's, or that he had a special destiny that required him to face extraordinary dangers. To hear a competent adult state definitively that his role would be limited to age-appropriate contributions felt revolutionary. There is one more matter we need to discuss, Amelia said, her tone becoming more formal. The prophecy that Professor Dumbledore referenced during his testimony. Both Harry and Sirius tensed at this mention. After extensive consultation with the Department of Mysteries and international experts on prophetic magic, the Ministry has concluded that prophecies are not binding contracts, Amelia continued. They are potential futures, not inevitable destinies. While we take the threat seriously, and will prepare accordingly, what we reject the notion that any child should be deliberately prepared for battle based on prophetic speculation. What does that mean for Harry? Sirius asked. It means that Harry will be protected, trained in appropriate defensive skills, and given every opportunity to live a normal life, Amelia replied. If and when he comes of age and chooses to take a more active role in confronting the Voldemort threat, that will be his decision as an adult. Until then, his welfare and education are the priorities. As they concluded their meeting, and Amelia prepared to leave, she paused at the study door. Mr. Potter, I want you to know that the changes we've implemented go far beyond your individual case. The Potter Protection Precedent will ensure that no magical child faces what you've endured. Your courage in testifying before the Wizengamot has protected countless other children. After she left, Harry and Sirius sat quietly in the study, processing the magnitude of the changes that had occurred in just 1 week. Sirius, Harry said eventually. What's it going to be like? Living with you, I mean." Sirius smiled, and for the first time since Harry had known him, it was an expression of pure happiness rather than one shadowed by grief or worry. "It's going to be whatever you want it to be, Harry. Within reason, of course. I'm still going to make sure you do your homework and eat proper meals and get enough sleep. But other than that, we'll figure it out together." "I've never had that before," Harry said quietly. "Someone who wanted to figure things out with me instead of for me." "Well, you have it now," Sirius replied. "Oughtn't Harry? Your parents would be so proud of how you've handled all of this. Not just the dangerous parts. Anyone can be brave when they have to be. But the way you testified to help other children, the way you trusted the adults who were trying to help you, that takes a different kind of courage." As evening settled over Grimmauld Place, Harry sat at the kitchen table, working on a transfiguration essay, while Sirius prepared dinner. The house felt warm and alive in a way Harry had never experienced, filled with the comfortable sounds of someone who genuinely enjoyed his company. For the first time in his life, Harry Potter was living in a home where his presence was wanted rather than merely tolerated, where his welfare was a priority rather than a complication, and where his future was seen as full of possibilities rather than predetermined by prophecy. The wizarding world might still face the threat of Voldemort's return, but they would face it with proper institutions, appropriate safeguards, and the understanding that protecting children was not just a legal obligation, but a moral imperative. And Harry Potter, the boy who lived, was finally free to discover who he might become when he was simply Harry, a teenager with a guardian who loved him, friends who supported him, and adults who understood that his greatest strength might not be his willingness to face danger, but his capacity to trust in a better future. The nightmare of manipulation and systematic endangerment was over. The dream of a normal magical childhood was finally beginning. Chapter 12. A Better Path Forward. 6 months later. May 15th, 1995. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Grimmauld Place kitchen as Harry Potter sat at the breakfast table, surrounded by the comfortable chaos of a family meal. His transfiguration homework lay spread across one end of the table, a complex essay on the ethical implications of human transfiguration that he had actually enjoyed writing, while Sirius read the morning edition of the Daily Prophet and occasionally commented on the more ridiculous headlines. "Listen to this," Sirius said with amusement, folding back a page. "Ministry's new Child Protection Department prevents third dangerous incident this month. Apparently, some genius at the Department for Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures thought it would be educational to bring a live manticore to a primary magical school demonstration." Harry looked up from his essay with interest. "What happened?" "Amelia Bones's new rapid response team intervened before any children were exposed to the creature," Sirius replied with satisfaction. "The whole event was shut down, the department head was suspended, and the school received a formal apology along with proper educational materials about dangerous magical creatures. 6 months ago, they probably would have let it happen and called it a learning experience," Harry observed, and was surprised to hear the bitter edge in his own voice. Sirius set down the newspaper and studied Harry with the attentive concern that had become one of the most reliable constants in Harry's life. "That's exactly right. But the important thing is that it didn't happen, and it won't happen in the future. The Potter protection precedent has real teeth." Harry nodded, still occasionally amazed by the ripple effects of the investigation that had changed his life so dramatically. Over the past 6 months, he had watched the wizarding world slowly but steadily implement reforms that prioritized child welfare over convenience, transparency over secrecy, and institutional accountability over personal authority. "Speaking of which," Sirius continued, "I got an owl from Minerva yesterday. She wanted to update us on your academic progress." "Is that good or bad?" Harry asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Decidedly good," Sirius replied with a grin. "Top marks in defense against the dark arts, which is hardly surprising given that you now have 3 qualified teachers, instead of hoping for the best with whoever Dumbledore could convince to take the job. Excellent progress in transfiguration and charms. Even Severus apparently noted marked improvement in potion-making technique and theoretical understanding, which from him is practically effusive praise. Harry felt a warm glow of satisfaction. His academic performance had improved dramatically once he no longer spent his summers in a state of emotional and nutritional deprivation, and once he had adult advocates who ensured his educational needs were being met rather than assuming his struggles were character-building opportunities. "There's more," Sirius added, his tone becoming more serious. "The Ministry Oversight Committee at Hogwarts has filed their monthly report, and they're recommending that the enhanced security measures be made permanent. Apparently, student well-being has improved across all metrics since they implemented proper adult supervision and eliminated the educational value of danger philosophy." "What kind of metrics?" Harry asked curiously. "Academic performance, reported incidents of student injury, disciplinary problems, even things like sleep quality and social relationships," Sirius explained. "Turns out that when children feel safe and supported, they're better at everything else too." The irony was not lost on Harry that the investigation sparked by his forced entry into a deadly tournament had resulted in comprehensive educational reforms that made Hogwarts safer for everyone. Sometimes he wondered what his school experience might have been like if these protections had existed from the beginning, if his first year had involved learning about magic rather than surviving obstacles designed to protect a philosopher's stone, if his second year had focused on academics rather than hunting a basilisk through the school's plumbing system. But he had learned not to dwell on the past. The future was what mattered now, and for the first time in his life, that future felt genuinely hopeful. "Harry," Sirius said, interrupting his thoughts, "I wanted to talk to you about something. What Amelia has asked me to join the Committee for Magical Defense as a consultant on Death Eater identification and tactics." Harry felt a familiar spike of anxiety. "Does that mean you'll be in danger?" "It means I'll be using my experience to help protect other people," Sirius replied gently, "and it will all be done through proper channels with appropriate backup and safety measures. No more lone wolf heroics or secret missions. The committee has learned from past mistakes." This was another significant change that had emerged from the investigation. The Wizarding World's response to the Voldemort threat was now coordinated through transparent government committees rather than secret organizations led by individuals who made unilateral decisions about other people's lives. The Order of the Phoenix still existed, but it now worked in cooperation with ministry officials rather than in defiance of them. "What about Dumbledore?" Harry asked. "Is he involved in the new defense planning?" "He provides advice when requested," Sirius replied carefully. "But he's no longer in a position to make strategic decisions or commit other people to dangerous missions without their knowledge or consent. The committee structure ensures that no single person has that kind of unchecked authority." Harry nodded, still processing the complex emotions he felt about his former headmaster. The revelation of Dumbledore's systematic manipulation had been devastating, but over the months he had come to understand that Dumbledore genuinely believed his actions served the greater good. The tragedy was not malicious intent, but the arrogant assumption that good intentions justified ignoring other people's rights and welfare. A knock at the front door interrupted his thoughts, followed by the familiar voices of Ron and Hermione. Sirius waved his wand to unlock the door, and Harry's best friends appeared in the kitchen doorway, both grinning broadly. "Ready for the most important meeting of the term?" Hermione asked, settling into a chair at the table. "Please tell me this isn't about SPEW," Ron said, though his tone was more fond than exasperated. "It's not about SPEW," Hermione replied with dignity. "It's about the Student Welfare Committee's end-of-term report." The Student Welfare Committee was another unexpected outcome of the investigation, a formal body comprised of representatives from all 4 houses that worked with the Ministry Oversight Committee to ensure student voices were heard in educational policy decisions. Hermione had been elected as the committee's first chair, a position that suited her perfectly. "What are you reporting on this term?" Sirius asked with interest. "The success of the new defense curriculum," Hermione replied proudly. "Student confidence in defensive magic has improved by 300% since Professor Lupin returned, and Tonks started teaching practical protection techniques. We've also seen a significant decrease in bullying incidents, probably because students now understand that magical self-defense is a legitimate skill rather than something they have to figure out on their own. Plus," Ron added, "the new policies about dangerous school events are working brilliantly. Remember how they were going to have the third years handle venomous tentacular in herbology without proper safety equipment? The Oversight Committee shut that down immediately and required Professor Sprout to develop a graduated safety curriculum instead." Harry smiled, thinking about how different this conversation would have been a year ago. Then, dangerous school experiences were simply accepted as part of the Hogwarts tradition. Now, adult supervision and student safety were considered non-negotiable priorities. "There's something else," Hermione said, her expression becoming more serious. "The committee wanted me to ask you about something, Harry. We're putting together a presentation for incoming first years about student rights and available support resources. Would you be willing to share your story?" "Not the dramatic parts," she added quickly, "but the importance of having adults who actually listen when students have concerns?" Harry considered the request thoughtfully. 6 months ago, he would have been horrified by the idea of speaking publicly about his experiences, but now, with the security of proper guardianship and the knowledge that his story had already helped protect other children, he felt differently. "I think I'd like that," he said. "If it helps other students understand they don't have to handle dangerous situations alone." "Excellent," Hermione replied with satisfaction. "We're also planning to have Neville speak about the importance of mental health support, and Luna will discuss how family pressure and social expectations can affect student well-being." The conversation continued over breakfast, touching on academic achievements, social developments, and the upcoming end-of-term celebrations. Harry found himself marveling at how normal it all felt, sitting around a table with family and friends, discussing school and future plans without the looming threat of immediate mortal danger. Later that afternoon, as Harry worked on his ancient runes translation in the Grimmauld Place library, Amelia Bones arrived for her weekly check-in. These visits had become routine over the past 6 months, part of the ministry's commitment to ensuring that Harry's transition to proper guardianship was successful. "How are things going, Harry?" she asked, settling into one of the comfortable armchairs. "Really well," Harry replied honestly. "Better than I ever thought they could be." "I'm glad to hear that," Amelia said, with genuine warmth. "I wanted to update you on some broader developments. The international magical cooperation agreements we've established have been remarkably successful. 3 other countries have implemented their own versions of the Potter protection precedent, and we're seeing similar improvements in child welfare outcomes across the European magical community." "That's incredible," Harry said, setting down his quill. "I never imagined that what happened to me could affect so many other people." "That's the power of institutional change," Amelia explained. "When we establish proper standards and accountability mechanisms, the benefits ripple outward, far beyond the original case. Your willingness to speak up, and the student movement that supported you, has probably prevented hundreds of cases of child endangerment across multiple countries." She paused, then continued with a slight smile. "There's also been an unexpected benefit in terms of international relations. The transparency and accountability we demonstrated during the investigation have actually strengthened diplomatic ties with other magical governments. They trust our institutions more now because they've seen that we're willing to hold powerful people accountable when they make mistakes." "What about the Voldemort situation?" Harry asked. "Still serious, but we're handling it properly now," Amelia replied. "Coordinated intelligence sharing, proper resource allocation, protection for vulnerable populations, and most importantly, no children being deliberately exposed to danger in the name of preparation or character building. As Amelia prepared to leave, she turned back to Harry with an expression of professional satisfaction. "You know, Harry, in all my years of magical law enforcement, this case has been the most rewarding. Not because of the investigation itself, though that was important work, but because of what we built afterward. We proved that institutions can change, that powerful people can be held accountable, and that protecting children is always the right priority." That evening, as Harry sat in the comfortable living room of Grimmauld Place, working on homework while Sirius read nearby, what he reflected on the extraordinary changes that had occurred in his life. 6 months ago, he had been a boy with no legal guardian, no adult advocate, and no voice in decisions that affected his safety and well-being. Now he had a family, institutional protections, and most importantly, the knowledge that his welfare mattered to people in positions to do something about it. The wizarding world still faced challenges. Voldemort's threat was real and serious, political tensions remained, and institutional change was often slow and difficult. But the foundation had been laid for addressing these challenges through proper channels rather than individual heroics or secret manipulations. Harry Potter was no longer the boy who lived, carrying the weight of the wizarding world's hopes and fears on his shoulders. He was simply Harry, a teenager with friends, family, academic goals, and a future full of possibilities that he would get to choose for himself. As he closed his textbook and prepared for bed, Harry realized that this might be the most important lesson of all, that the greatest magic wasn't surviving impossible challenges or fulfilling ancient prophecies, but building a world where children could grow up safe, supported, and free to become whoever they were meant to be. The investigation that had begun with questions about tournament security had ended with something far more valuable. A wizarding world that finally understood that protecting its children was not just a legal obligation, but the foundation of everything else worth protecting. And that, Harry thought as he headed upstairs to his own room in a house where he was genuinely wanted, was real magic indeed.